3, 2, 1.
Saving the day.
Can't believe it! Look at this!
Welcome, everybody, to the May OCC Clash. We are here at the pre-show. We're going to walk you through all the decks, all the players, so you know exactly what to expect when we go live with the OCC in just under 30 minutes. I am your host, Christo. I am joined by Berto, by Thanatron, and last but certainly not least, Starry. We have a heck of a show for you today. We have got new players, we have got returning players, we have $1,500 to give away, we have a little reveal for the Covert Operations expansion coming down the pipe this summer. So it is going to be a hell of a show. Now let's dive right into the bracket because we do have a really interesting mix of players here today. We have some of your, favorites hanging out. You're going to see Head in that first match. We've got Spoker. They're going up against each other in the first feature quarterfinal. We've got Kazow against Electrify, which is two new players who are going to be going head-to-head, two first-timers here. Noan taking on Nuff in the first of the bottom half of this bracket. That's going to be our second feature matchup here. Noan, obviously, regular in our OCC. Nuff making their first appearance. That's going to be a tough matchup for them. And then Kazow going up against Morphling. Morphling, another first timer. Kazow having been here, once or twice before. So good to see how that pans out. But a lot of action here for these players to make it to the finals to try and take home 750 US dollars for first place. Got 450 for second. So going to be a big day. Let's dive into our first player here. We've got Spoker as our first competitor we're going to take a look at, and we're going to have Thanatron help walk us through this. Again, Spoker, no stranger to the OCC, competing in an eerie 666 matches, 71% win rate, finishing first this season. Now, Thanatron, Spoker, again, has been here before, but we don't often see them ending up kind of in that top slot of ladder.
Yeah, that's an incredible finish for Spoker. I have to imagine they're very pleased with themselves. I believe that is the first overall first finish on a ladder for Spoker. So really playing today from a powerful position, and we'll see what he can do with it.
Right on. Let's go ahead and bring up Spoker's deck list, and Thanatron, you can walk us through these.
So our first list here is the return of a pretty powerful combined arms list that maybe we haven't seen in quite some time. Used to be a real speedy menace for a long time. Many ladder players, I'm sure, have recognized this list and lost to it by turn 4 or 5. We see the 4 Humbers and we see the combined arms. We also have the 56 Jaeger Regiment. Those 3 cards are going to hopefully combine to create just a ridiculous free operating Fury tank that you can use to just pound your opponent's face in before they really have a chance to do anything with their lives. The second and third decks, we actually both see 2 ramp decks here, kind of the inverse of each other. We'll start with the US version. Pretty strong US ramp deck here. We've got just 1 fortification to provide some extra health, but we have plenty of AoE, plenty of big units, and plenty of ways to just ramp those credits out and start really affecting the board with some large and in charge stuff. We do see Victory March and the Terribles, so we are taking a high op cost package, hoping to get some draw off high operation cost units, and also possibly some health if we can get enough of them on the board with that big Victory March. So some of the new cards from the winter expansion in there working strong, very cool to see. And then we kind of turn that on its head. We have a Brit US ramp, which has, you can see, a lot of similar cards, but there are some differences here. P47, the fighter that will destroy a random unit in the front line, I think is a very interesting choice definitely a good card that has seen play, but probably hasn't seen that much play recently. But we have, again, just one fortification, but sincerely yours as well. So a little more health in this British version, but still able to ramp out to some big flying fortresses and hopefully create some very big turns. And of course, with US as the side nation, that enables you to take ASW and have it not only ramp you out 3 credits, but also have that DFA effect on the end. So probably the stronger of the 2 ramp decks, but ramp hyper aggro with combined arms is a very interesting 3 decks to see today from Spoker.
Let's go ahead and take a peek at Spoker's opponent head here and see exactly what Spoker can expect to see in this first quarter final. There we have had 420 matches, 78% win rate, very effective and efficient here, coming in third and making it to the OCC Clash. Berto, we're gonna have you walk us through Head's decks. Any surprises here seeing Head compete once again in the OCC?
None at all. I mean, he's a fantastic player. You can tell from that win rate for sure. Um, I'm quite impressed by that. It seems like win rates haven't been as impressive these past couple of seasons. It seems a little bit harder to reach those numbers recently, but Head still pulling through with it. And first up, we have this German US mid range, which a lot of players play the Japan minor version, but this US minor really gives access to a lot of incredible cards like the War Machine, like these Fifth Rangers. And this deck puts on a lot of pressure very early. Next up, we have a Britain ramp list going for the Commonwealth as the main win condition, and those production orders granting those really nice bombers gives that extra little bit of reach in case your opponent does a little bit of healing. And finally, we have the classic, the all-time Japan German Jagro. This deck is pretty interesting. Head's only running 2 expansions, so if he has a game go longer, that puts him at a bit of a disadvantage having less draw, but hopefully it should make his early game more consistent in finding potent units. And we all know how it feels to get too many expansions in your opening hand and not being able to trigger them when your opponent takes the front line. So a little bit of a risk versus reward there for that deck.
The deck that never dies. We got Jagro, and I feel like we're going to see that forever and always. Let's move on to our second quarterfinal here. We've got Kazow as our first competitor. 541 matches, 65% win rate, coming in 11th, making it all the way through the qualifiers, and chomping away on some yummy, what looks like ramen in that photo. Starry, what do we know about Kazow?
Well, Takao is a pretty well-known Tony OTK player. They kind of play it no matter what, and Tony OTK happens to be really good right now, and they're very, very skilled at the deck. So I'm sure that that's what they piloted right into that 11th season finish, and I'm super excited to see if they've chosen it for this OCC.
Let's go ahead and bring up the decks and find out.
And there
What
it
do we
is. That
got?
very first deck is a US Japan Tony OTK list. It plays some really interesting cards that you only get through US, like for example, Victory March for both HQ defense gain and cost reduction. Next up, we have Japan Finland Jalvich, which looks to be a pretty standard list, but I am really happy to see this sort of Sally package where you are self-discarding Sally with scrap metal, or you can use scrap metal to discard one of your salvaged units, but either way, you're getting some really good value. And then last up, we have a Germany-Japan mid-range list, which is pretty standard. We've been seeing this quite a lot over the last couple OCCs. It's a really effective tournament deck in particular. But we don't see any Southern plans in this one, so we're not going to be seeing any crazy credit differences. Just playing really good value units.
Right on. Thank you so much, Starry. Let's go ahead and take a look at Takau's opponent. in this second quarter final. We're going to have Electrify up here. 510 matches, 63% win rate, finishing 21st. So a little bit down a ways on that ladder. Still snuck their way in, making good use of the qualifiers. Thanatron, Electrify's first appearance here at an OCC. Any insight into who they are or how they play?
I actually don't have any insight. I apologize. I have not played Electrify. I'm not very familiar at all with their game. The full meme with Shaq. I'm not very familiar with Electrify's game, but certainly ready to see it today. 63, basically 64% win rate, and only playing a good 500 matches to make it is certainly nothing to shake a stick at. Those are impressive early numbers. So excited to see what they bring to the table today.
Well, let's dive into their deck list and see if we can extract any information here.
So what I see first is a German US sort of that new-ish mid-rangey but tiny bits of ramp deck that we see so often. A lot of mid-range power helps it kind of sustain with some big units, those big Folkwolfs and a Yag Bomber, and has just those tiny bits of ramp to maybe get it out to those large units a little faster. And then second here, we see a hyper aggro Japan Soviet deck that we've seen quite a bit. Really interesting here that we see two pushes. Actually, I apologize. Perhaps this is not the hyper aggro deck that I am more familiar with. Although perhaps it also is. There are a lot of cavalry regiments, TK early, recon, so we do see an expansions, a lot of those. But using a 5-year plan for draw, and then those two pushes to possible removal, and then also possible burn on the HQ. So really interesting to see what Electrify can do with that. And then kind of running the full spectrum here. The last deck we have what is a pretty standard ramp deck. We see again Brit US ramp with those ASW patrols, big Commonwealth, and then those production orders and war machines for the US, basically only taking ramp with their US slots, relying on the Brit slots for looks like all of the units. So interesting ramp list as well.
A lot of variety there from Electrify. Let's go ahead and look at the third quarterfinal. We've got Noan as our first competitor. 75% win rate, 423 matches, coming in second. Berto, we're going to go back to you, and it seems like you've gotten a couple of the mainstays here to talk about. But again, I don't think there's any surprise with Noan coming in and hanging out second here on the ladder.
No, none whatsoever, and no surprise, of course, with the favorite card either.
Some things always stay the same, but one thing we can also count on is the interesting deck list that Noan is liable to bring. Let's have you walk us through them.
So this first deck list is really something out of left field. I haven't really seen anything like it. It is a Soviet-German aggro, I would put it as. It runs a lot of really fast units. It runs these 0Ks infantries to really get on the board early. If he finds one of these and an iron from the north, he can have a absolutely explosive turn one. And lots of draw from these sickles from the 22nd, even a 5-year plan. If Noan can get these things out early, if he can get draw online, or if he can get an early blitzkrieg, this deck could end the game incredibly early. But there's also the risk you find a lot of 1-drops. You don't really find the draw to go after it. Maybe your opponent has a winter warfare or a supply priorities. This deck can also fall apart very easily at the same time. Next up, we have this Japan-Finland salvage deck. A little similar to what we saw before, but Noan opts for only running 5 Finnish cards, just the 4 scrap metal, and this 61st Infantry Regiment. which is the 4/6 with salvage that gives your salvage units +3/3 when you deploy them. And of course, making use of that Sally with the scrap metal, a very, very powerful combo. And finally, we have the Japan mid-range deck, again, opting to take out the Sovereign plan, just to focus more on this unit strategy, keep applying threats turn after turn, and not sort of losing out on the tempo development from playing Sovereign plan for the long-term gains that it gives you.
Right on. And then we're going to see Noan taking on Nuff in that third quarterfinal. Nuff, first appearance in an OCC, 61% win rate, bit of a drop. Finished 23rd this season, but still managed to make it through the qualifiers and show up here today. Starry, not to put you on the same spot that I put Thanatron on earlier, but do we know anything about Nuff, or is this going to be their coming out party?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been playing a whole lot of ladder recently, but I personally have never run into them. But clearly they are a rather talented player, having gotten their way through those OCC qualifications. So curious to see what they have for us in store today.
Well, let's find out as we bring up the deck lists.
So their first deck is a US Germany frontline list, and it is very typical for, US Germany frontline list that you would see. The only thing about this list that I think is particularly noteworthy is the inclusion of Schutzen, which has kind of fallen by the wayside since the Winter War expansion. So I am going to love to see that in action. Next up, we have a very interesting Japan-Poland, um, halfway between Jagro and Legions. It's playing a couple of copies of all of those one-cost Blitz units, as well as 2 copies of expansion for some early card draw, and then kind of transitions more into the Legions plan as the game continues. And then lastly, we have a Germany-US mid-range ramp list, and it's pretty much exactly the stock list. The only difference that I can see is that it is trading out 1 copy of dive bombing for 1 copy of duress, but aside from that, it is pretty much just the stock list. But yeah, very, very interested to see that Japan-Poland deck come into play. That one is very creative and super excited to see that one.
Right on. Let's dive into our final quarterfinal here. We've got Kazow as our first competitor. 541 matches, 29th finish. We're seeing a lot of folks go in and really fight their way through the qualifiers, Thanatron.
Yeah, really awesome to see. The qualifiers, of course, are extremely tough, but they are Swiss now, so there's not a ton of advantage from finishing at the very top end of that section or the bottom end. So there is definitely plenty of room for those low 20s or high 20s, low 30s guys to fight their way through, really take advantage of that Swiss. But it's full of killers, right? It's this the Swiss is only great players, so making it through is certainly an achievement in itself.
And that also highlights some of the differences between playing on ladder versus playing in a tournament setting. And we see these players coming through having, dabbled in that tournament side of things. So may go ahead and help them here in the OCC as we bring up Kazow's deck list that Thanatron can run us through.
So some really interesting deck lists here that I am a fan of. Can't wait to see Kazow take the stage today. Starting off with some German ramp, which is something that a lot of people have tried. There's been quite a few iterations, none of which have really truly stuck. So bringing it to a big tournament like this, very cool. We can see the ASW patrol. We can see some other ramp as well, trying to get into those big ones, just like Leo. And then what's really cool, I think, is Enemy Spotted, card that we don't see a lot, a countermeasure to draw 3. US Germany really going to struggle with draw, so getting that could be imperative. Then we move into a Brit German. This actually looks like a discard deck, so the return of some discard here. We see Wolfpack back from its long exile and annihilation as well. Some really big discard hitters. And then the last one, we have a US Finland deck, which also is very cool. Both 5Ds. Some other players only bringing one 5D today. Both 5Ds. I think that card is cracked, so I enjoy seeing both versions here. And, a really big list that goes all the way down to some 10 cost credits. So a lot of ramp here as well. United We Stand, some ways to get some credits out. Really interesting lists here.
Going to be a heck of a battle in that last matchup because we're going to have Kazow going up against Morphling, who's making their first appearance in the OCC. Let's go ahead and take a look at their player card here and learn a little bit more about them as they come to compete. But Morphling, 820 matches, 70% win rate, finishing fourth. So again, a player we haven't seen in the OCC yet, but coming in big on ladder. Berto, have you run into Morphling before?
I don't think I've ever seen Morphling before. It is harder for me to remember the Chinese names because I can't, hear them in my head when I try to read them, right? So I could have played him before, and I probably wouldn't know it.
Nonetheless, a fourth place finish on ladder is quite the accomplishment. Let's go ahead and take a look at the decks and see what they are loaded up with today.
So, firstly, again, we have this German US list. And I think this is the first tournament that it looks like the US minor version of this list is becoming more popular than the Japan minor version. And maybe the main reason is being able to get in those war machines can make a really big difference early on. Next up, we have Britain US Commonwealth. And finally, we have a pretty classic version of US Frontline, running one cheeky copy of In the Navy. It's really scary to see that in your opponent's list in open deck list formats and think, oh, I'm really going to have to think about this countermeasure every single turn they have one or more credit up. And that can be really powerful. The other thing I noticed is that we have the third and fourth place finishers on ladder in this tournament, which is pretty incredible to see. You don't usually see the top players who still have to play the qualifiers, doing so well in both, and really showing why they're here in more ways than one.
Absolutely. That's a heck of an achievement when you go from I was one position away from getting a buy into this OCC, and now I have to compete, go through, I believe it was Thanatron mentioned, a pool, just a Swiss tournament of killers, of just the best of the best on ladder, and still manage to make it through and, make it to this OCC. So looking forward to seeing what Morphling can do in their first appearance. Big thank you to all the analysts doing a phenomenal job breaking down the decks. We're going to get into the OCC clash in just a few moments right after this break.
2, 1.
Saving the day.
Can't believe it! Look at this!
Welcome everybody to the May OCC Clash. I am your host Christo. I am joined by Thanatron and by Berto Burrito. We've got Starry waiting in the wings for our second feature quarterfinal. But looking back at that highlight package from the World Championships, it's wild to think that we are pretty much halfway through another year of competitive cards. But this OCC specifically, we have a whole influx of fresh new blood coming in here. And Thanatron, I'm just curious, literally half of the competitors here are going to be first timers in an OCC. Any thoughts as to what might be contributing to this just influx of new players?
It could be quite a few things. Perhaps gearing up. There's a new expansion coming very soon, so maybe that's drawing some new players in. They're kind of getting a head start on some comp play, getting a head start on some tough ladder sessions. Could also maybe be the summer. We're getting real close to a sort of maybe vacation-y time frame. Maybe people got a lot of free time. I don't know, but it is great to see. Really exciting today for half the tournament to be people we're not familiar with at all.
And Berto, I want to touch on something you had said during the pre-show where we broke down all the decks, went through all the players here. You're saying it's the first event where the Japan minor version of that Germany mid-range list, so we've been seeing that pretty consistently for the last little while. It's the first time we've really seen it shift to the US minor version. Now, you mentioned one of the possibilities as to why that might have happened is really the access to ramp cards, getting War Machine in there early, things like that. Is that what you see as the main reason why that shift occurred? And do you think it's to combat something in the meta, or do you think it was just, hey, this feels better because I can kind of get to my cards a little bit sooner?
Well, this might be something to do with my bias, not loving Sovereign Plan, but I think that part of it might be that there's so much aggro and mid-range going around that enough times these players are finding I'm actually not able to play Sovereign Plan on turn 4 against this much pressure. Is it still worth playing the card when there are these matchups and these game states where half the time I'm not even able to play it on turn 4? Because if you're not playing it on turn 4, it's not usually great. And then the decks that people seem to be playing that aren't mid-range or aggro seem to mostly have ramp in it, which also reduces the impact of Sovereign Plan. So yeah, I'd say it's a bit of a meta call that you're not playing against much traditional control that isn't running any ramp in it. There's not many like push OTK decks that Sovereign Plan would be consistently effective into.
Yeah, I've definitely been in that situation on turn 4 where you're sitting there looking at the Southern plan in your hand going, I'm supposed to play this, but I'm pretty sure if I do, I might just lose. So I don't want to, and that feels weird. So I definitely get that. Let's go ahead and get to our first matchup then. Let's bring up the bracket first, and we'll get a quick walkthrough of the players, what we got going on, who we're going to see. Again, we broke down all the decks, went through all of the player profiles in the pre-show. You can watch that on demand anytime. But in our first feature quarterfinals, we got Spoker taking on Head. Obviously, Thanatron and Berto here to cast that matchup. Kazow against Electrify. Two of our new players will be going up against each other in the second quarterfinal. In that third quarterfinal, which will be our second feature matchup, we've got Noan taking on Nuff. Berto and Starry going to be calling that one to see if Nuff can go ahead and dethrone one of our regulars here at the OCC. And in the final matchup, we've got Kazow against Morphling. Morphling also making their first appearance. So, as per usual, this is going to be a matchup which is best of three. All the players have brought 3 decks to this event, but one is going to get banned right up until they get into the final. So they will be playing 2 out of 3. Let's go ahead and take another quick recap of the decks that we're going to see in this first matchup, starting with Spoker. Thanatron, what's Spoker bringing to the dance?
So first up, we've got a combined arms list with the Humbers and the combined arms and the 56 Jaeger Regiment to make it attack for free. Very old list that we've seen quite a lot of, one of the standard aggro lists. And then we move into some big, thick ramp lists, a US-based ramp list with Brit and a Brit-based ramp list with USA. I would say the stronger of the two, probably the Brit main. Things like ASW Patrol can be really strong, but either way, we're trying to get a lot of credits and get out to those flying fortresses, get out to those big units.
Right on. Let's take a look at Spoker's opponent. We've got Head Berto. Can you walk us through Head's 3 decks?
Sure. We have this German US mid range list, which we've already talked a little bit about. We have the Brit US ramp list, but instead going for a Commonwealth finisher rather than these sorts of bombers at the top end. And of course, we have Jagro with a lot of one-ofs, things like one of Kagoshima Regiment, one of Mountain Gun, which makes this Jagro list a little more interesting than most, you could say.
Let's take a look at the bans and see which decks these players are going to have access to as we get into this first quarterfinal. So Spoker is losing the US Brit ramp, and then you've got Head losing that Jagro list. So a couple bans here, a couple of interesting bans here. What Berto, if you're Head, what makes you want to ban that US Brit ramp instead of the Brit US ramp?
Um, I'm not sure exactly. I was thinking he was going to ban the Brit ramp just because it has a little more HQ defense gain in it, which always poses a bit of a dilemma for Commonwealth decks, because then it means you need to, have your hand low enough that you're not overdrawing too much when you play Commonwealth, that you're getting the bombers to connect to the HQ to get that extra little bit of distance. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure the reasoning there.
Well, we're going to find out if it was the right choice as we get into this first game of our first quarterfinal of the May OCC.
Definitely super interesting. I feel like over the course of the game, Brit Ramp and US Ramp have both been, big stalwart types decks that have always, been the inverse of each other, right? They're both ramp decks and they're both the same two nations, just swapping the side nation. But Britain has always seemed to be a little bit better, right? Wouldn't you say?
Uh, yeah, I mean, Britain just has some really nice elites that you get to put in there. Particularly Sincerely Yours is just such an insane card.
Absolutely. US struggles with draw so much.
Yeah, and the US deck that Spoker brought here, it's running 3 copies of Le Terrible, which is a really powerful card when you get that engine online, but he doesn't have a lot of units to trigger it for the draw, so I don't know. Maybe it's that Head is a lot more practiced against this Brit main version. Maybe he thinks Spoker's making a big mistake not running the Commonwealth in this version, and that Ed thinks that he'll just be able to remove every threat. I'm not too sure.
Certainly looms large over this set here. Very interesting. Spoker, I don't think had the greatest start. Not finding a CA, not getting a Humber on line turn 1, but now we see what could be a nasty turn here. He has 4. He could move up and basically blitzkrieg and do 4 damage 3 times. Could do 8 damage to the HQ and throw that tiny German tank into the Zerstorer for a very nice trade. And that's going to be exactly what he does. That's how fast combined arms can pop off. Obviously, the fury of the tank coming in huge, not making the trade. Just, we're going face.
Yeah, and it's hard to overstate how relevant just seeing that comet is, because that gives Spoker the green light to just go all HQ. German US doesn't have any guards. Of course, you're not able to run, air defense in the minor nation or anything like that. So, Spoker already knows he has this.
Huge CA sitting on 4 health. I've got a comment in hand. It's coming out next turn. You don't have a way to heal. You don't have a way to guard. How do you feel about this big CA play, right? Obviously, he's the only guy bringing CA today. I don't feel like we've seen CA in the past couple months. It's sort of a curveball, if you will, to bring this hyper fast deck when it hasn't been seen in quite a while. It looks like it really might work out for him.
Yeah, I mean, but at the same time, we can imagine that Comet's on the bottom half of the deck, then, Head has so many stats on board and it could go completely differently. But
Yeah, very,
instead,
very true.
Spoker takes a brutally quick one.
And there is a lot.
The first turn he can possibly play Comet, it's to kill his opponent.
That is disgusting. Spoker looking, if he looks ahead in this tournament at all, and he's a great player, so he probably doesn't, right? Probably has his head squarely on head. But looking ahead to this tournament, there's a lot of ramp today. There are a lot of interesting decks that CA might be able to run under quick. So it'll be super interesting to see how that sort of levels out if Spoker is able to have a long run today.
Did I misinterpret the bans, or did Spoker select the wrong deck?
This does look like his US ramp by Spoker. That is a good call. Spoker perhaps among our thinking and was prepared. Like obviously everybody's going to ban the Brit ramp. Out of the 2 ramps, no one's going to ban the US ramp. They're going to ban the Brit ramp. So maybe even a little bit more to our point earlier of sort of how Head is affecting this match with this choice. He might be, just onto something that we aren't. We'll get a clarification from our tournament admins here about the decks.
I have certainly made the mistake before of thinking, well, my opponent's going to ban this deck, of course. So, I'm practicing, certain lineups, imagining a ban coming through, and then they ban a different deck, and I can't figure out why, and then I end up selecting the wrong deck. I think that's happened to me once or twice.
Yeah, absolutely. Back to the band screen here. It's probably just reminding our players real fast of what the bans were. Sometimes they get communicated extremely late in the set as well. So very possible just a tiny bit of confusion, perhaps a misclick. Hopefully Spoker wasn't too, or Head, weren't too in love with those initial hands, those initial mulligans. Especially Head. Would be a shame if he really, really liked his hand.
Yeah. The one good thing is that Spoker only has one deck left, so it's not like, from Head's perspective, you feel a little cheated that your opponent could switch decks. There's
Right,
always a
yeah.
little bit of area there that can be a bit uncomfortable, like, or if you're
Absolutely.
ahead, like, am I able to switch decks to like counter because you took the wrong deck? It's hard to
Right,
decide on
right.
that sort of thing, but
Immediately, there's a mind game of who's switching, who isn't switching, and what's going on there, and then also just the half gamesmanship, half sportsmanship, trying
all
not
right.
to put yourself into a hole either.
So we do have the confirmation that US was the banned main nation. So just a small mistake there from Spoker in which one he selected.
Yeah, we'll get this ironed out in just a second for everybody.
I don't know how his decks are named. He might just have them both named Ramp. You never know what's going on there.
Both decks actually were just a dollar sign on his screen. It's very confusing. Got some new card backs here. Got the crossed keys. It's a nice one. Something not seen a lot. Head with some big planes in his initial hand.
Surely you're gonna send those guys back. And even Yagged Bomber, there's not too many good targets for it against Spoker, I don't feel like, because almost all of his cards have some sort of deployment effect that you don't really want your opponent getting back. The exception to that mainly being the Grenadier Guards.
Yeah, absolutely. Just checking Head's deck list real fast here. So Head, bringing 4 War Machines in this deck, was able to find 2 of them off the jump. So really, really useful for him. I know we have seen a couple decks that only carry a couple of War Machines. I was interested if perhaps he found both of them immediately. But he is bringing all 4, still finding 2 so early. Obviously, double the credits for Head. That's going to be where he wants to be.
MI5 is so powerful here. Uh, these sort of discard/draw denial effects are always particularly effective against Ramp because they're already using, these war machines to not directly get value. And then you take away more of the payoffs. And a dive bombing is not what you want to see either.
Yeah, Head with so much money and not much to spend it on. The Ramp player's nightmare. Meanwhile, Spoker, all of the tools he could want. He's gaining health, he's gaining cards, the resources, Glamour Boys, more health, guards, everything he could want. And to your point about how MI5 really limiting Head's ability to get into his deck to find some cool stuff to spend that extra money on, that's looking real powerful for this game, and is a really interesting choice, right? I feel like MI5 almost always brought in some sort of discard Brit deck or discard German deck, but seeing it in Ramp is a little more rare.
In Nakshub as well. That is one of the worries when you start playing, sort of a mid-range list with Ramp. You still have all these, really early game cards in it. And, and another MI5. Of course, these
Just
early game cards can be incredibly good, but at the same time, it's just so scary to be ramping out and have the possibility of just like finding these units that are pieces of trash in the situation.
Just getting your timeline scaled back to this degree, and that's the third glamour boy in the top, 16 cards or so for Spoker as well. When the only thing Head was able to find was a comet, like this whole time is just destruction.
He needs to find some FWs, and he needs to find them yesterday.
He needs to hope those FWs draw into more FWs, but the
Yeah.
ASW looming large as well. I'd hate to see Head find one big unit and then immediately have it disintegrated. He is not in a good spot and already down 1-0 to Spoker in this set.
And if Spoker wants to, he can just start a Wellington beatdown even. But he might want an additional guard before he tries anything like that.
Yeah, maybe that's why he doesn't take Commonwealth. He's like, yeah, obviously, I mean, look, I can get to 30 health quick. That's not the issue. The issue is I'm winning this before turn 12. Interesting here as well. Could see Spoker just take the 50-50 and really hope to get that Schutzen.
You can't get this to Spoker. That would... Oh, no.
Here's the thing. Even if Spoker was not able, obviously the second ASW take another shot at the 50-50. Spoker knows that Comet was coming down, does not care. Knows the race is in his favor. 8 damage a
And
turn here.
the Mustang. Oh my
Ooh.
goodness.
We haven't seen a Musty in quite some time. At least I haven't. What a call. Really interesting tech choices by Spoker. Obviously, this was lost for Head long before that Mustang play, but that Mustang play, very big. The MI5's very big. Those are not normal ramp cards, but man, were they effective.
And Head
Was
has so little hope, he doesn't even play the Panzer 3H to see what it shows. There's no Leopold in the deck. What is he even hoping to find?
Yeah, absolutely. That was rough. Condolences to Head. But congratulations, Spoker. I mean, you love when wins come like that.
Yeah, you hate sitting there going like, Head drew such a bad hand, Head lost that matchup, but like you want to celebrate who actually won it. And Berto, you touched on it with the Panzer, right? Like what was Head hoping for there? Was there anything? Obviously, conceding the match, he clearly didn't think there was anything there, but given that matchup, given his hand, given what Spoker had, was there any way for Head to pull that out?
I really don't think so. I mean, not without Spoker making some huge mistakes. Something like giving Head the opportunity to use a Jagd bomber to destroy um, the Avray, but that's just not going to happen with these players. He's never going to end a turn with 9 cards in his hand. Head doesn't run Leopold, which feels like would be the card that he needs. He doesn't run any way to generate Leopold. His units are so dependent on being the ones attacking in, not the ones being value traded into, and he can never set up to get to the point that he's back to being the one doing the value trades. There's just no way.
Leak.
And Thanatron, let's go back to game one for a second. Let's talk about that combined arms list that Spoker brought, because you had talked about it a bit during the pre-show that, hey, we haven't seen this in a minute, and then it's kind of all over ladder now, and it shows up in this tournament and it pretty much does its job, right? Just completely runs over Head in game one, and Head again playing a mid-range deck that you figure should theoretically have some tools to slow it down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I certainly wouldn't call what Spoker got with the resources that he was able to get through his draw a low roll, but it certainly wasn't a high roll either, right? We've seen that deck just basically turn 2, 3-5 Fury tank. Like that's what that deck wants. That's the role that deck is trying to get, and it's not hard for that deck to get that role, right? So we didn't even see it at the peak of its power. And there's a lot of potential ramp matchups of slow decks that are not going to be able to handle that. And as we saw, slower decks that even if that high roll doesn't come through for Spoker, that he still has time to just sort of take a couple turns, maybe assemble some of those resources, and then build his big, one Blitzkrieg, one CA draw away at any time. The burst is the burst is there. So really cool to see, Spoker bring that kind of blast from the past and use it so effectively.
And just to add to that, the issue with the ban was actually on the tournament admin side. It seems like it was miscommunicated, so no harm, no foul there. No player was being malicious in those decisions. So that's always nice to see as well. Let's go ahead and bring up the bracket here and update us as to where we are at in today's May OCC. Looks like a bunch of quick sort of games going through in the quarterfinals. You just saw Spoker defeat Head 2-0. Electrify making their first appearance defeats Kazow, who also making their first appearance 2-0. We got Morphling taking out Kazow in that last quarterfinal. But we're gonna jump into Noan and Nuff here. As we get ready for our second feature quarterfinal, and we welcome Starry to the caster's desk. So let's get back into it. Let's take a look at Noan and Nuff, and let's get ready for this next quarterfinal. Let's dive right in, and Starry, we'll start with you. Let's go ahead and bring up Noan's decks to get a quick recap of what we're expecting to see here.
Sure. So Noan's first deck seems to be a Soviet Germany more aggressive list, looking to blitz out some early units, potentially even try and high roll with a quick iron from the north. Very interesting, has some elements of self-damage without necessarily the payoff, but a rather aggressive Soviet list. We don't see that very often. Next up, we have a Japan-Finland Jalvage list. Running scrap metals, of course, as well as sallies to potentially refill your hand in combination with those scrap metals. And then lastly, we have a Germany-Japan mid-range list, and this list is not running any copies of Southern Plan. It seems to have forfeited those and just playing valuable units. So yeah, really just looking to play the best unit on every single turn that is available to those two nations. So
And Berto definitely broke down his love affair with Southern Plan, so must be feeling pretty good about seeing Noan deciding to cast that card to the side. Let's go ahead and actually turn it over to Berto as we look at Nuff's lineup in this quarterfinal.
Right, so we have a lovely US front line running 2 copies of Blitzkrieg, everything pretty standard, pretty scary. The only thing that might be a little different than most lists is that there's just 2 copies of N10, so only 2 ways to suppress your opponent's unit, so you have to be pretty sparing with Nuff's list here. Then we have Japan, Poland, sort of Jagro almost, and then moving into the Intel package. And then finally we have the German-US mid-range, and hopefully it'll work out better for him than it worked out for Head, because man, those were some tough draws for Head in that game for what he was going up against.
Before we look and see if Nuff is able to kind of coax his deck into a better opening hand, let's see what bans we have here and if Nuff will even be able to bring this one to the party. And it looks like Nuff will not, as both German decks are banned here. On Nuff's side, we've got the German-US mid-range. On Noan's side, the German-Japan mid-range. Starry, let's jump it over to you. If you're in Noan's shoes, you're looking at Nuff's list. You got the US Germany, you've got that weird Japan Poland list and the German US mid range. What would make you want to ban that mid range list? Is it just kind of the most proven out of the 3?
I think that it has the biggest potential to high roll, especially when you're bringing a rather aggressive lineup, because it has early Nashib, early Verx Pioneer, and it is looking to play like a Through the Breach, turn 1 or turn 2, or a dive bombing to clear one of your early units. It's kind of teched to deal with the aggro threats early, get to those 3 and 4 costs quickly. So I can see where it would cause problems, especially when Noan is playing stuff like 0 cost 1/1s with Blitz, or 15th Cavalries with Japan Finland. I can see where the potential for an early Noshib into just like eating every single unit that you have as an aggro deck would be extremely problematic for you.
And Berto, let's go ahead and look on the other side of things, right? If you're enough shoes now, you're looking at Noan's lineup. Obviously, got some fun stuff that Noan's bringing to the dance. Again, is it just the mid range? Hey, that's the standard list. Let's just get that one out of the way, and we'll figure out the Jalvage in that Soviet Germany list.
Yeah, I think that could definitely play a role. Um, and sometimes you look at people's lists that are a little off meta. Some people lean the way of, I'm not exactly sure what it does, and I'm a bit afraid of that. Other people lean the way of, if this deck was better, it would be the deck that's more popular, and it would be what I'm seeing on ladder, but it's not, so I think it's going to have a slightly worse win rate, and I think I can adapt to the situation.
And I want to stick with you for a minute as we talk about Nuff's list, and you walked us through that that Japan Poland list. You know what? Never mind. Let's dive right into the action here as we get ready for our second feature quarterfinal.
Yeah, no one's starting off strong with a 15th Cavalry into a Type 93, but Nuff kind of has the counter to that. The Recon is super good at trading off, maintaining card advantage, and if Nuff is able to drop that signal too, then you even get 1 damage out of it.
Yeah, and usually it would be really hard for Nuff to play this recon here because of the risk of 35T, but obviously no one is playing the Finland minor version, and with open deck lists, Nuff is not forced to play around that.
Yeah, what Nuff is gonna have to play around though is no one's copies of Out of the Mist. It can eat up those Jagro units really fast, and then if no one plays something like Scrap Metal into a Dragon Slayer, or even just like a Sheedan, just dropping a Sheedan, those are things that Nuff has to have in the back of their mind. Now, we as the viewers know that that's not really the case, but that's something that Nuff constantly has to think about, which is why they aren't really playing these units and looking to keep them around and hopefully trade them off into no one's more aggressive units.
Yeah, and with this full pass from Nuff, he must have been thinking, my opponent's passing completely with 4 cards in hand on turn 3. My opponent must surely have like at least one Out of the Mist, right?
Yeah, and when
And
no
that's
one's playing 4 and probably mulliganing for them specifically, especially given that Nuff is playing 6, I believe 6 1-cost blitz units. Yeah, I mean, if you're Noan, you have no reason not to mulligan for them.
and now the jig is up. Nuff knows that there's no Out of the Mists, but this key looks like it's going to connect for another 6 damage. And
Yeah, without any of those legions to slow down that assault from the Dragon Slayer, it is not looking super great for Nuff here. I believe
yeah,
that the Raid Grade is the only way to even survive, but yeah, definitely not the position you want to be in for Nuff. I'm gonna check Nuff's list real quick, see if they're playing any healing, and it looks like the only healing in their deck is the Błyskawica. So that can be highly variable on what you hit, and you might just hit a scrap metal or an out of the mist, which heals you for 1. So Nuff is not going to be able to rely on any consistent healing in this match.
Yeah, some guards will need to be found right here.
And that is not it, although what you can
He
do,
can just barely survive, yeah.
yeah, is bombing raid and then trade off. I think the bombing raid in the HQ is the right play here, yep. That'll maximize your damage. And no one is getting stuck with these sallies in hand with no way to get them out yet, but they do play, you know, plenty of copies of Out of the Mist, or sorry, I mean Scrap Metal, and that would be really nice to hit. And Nuff is down to their last HQ defense, and unfortunately doesn't have the credits to activate that Tarnov.
Oh.
That
Wait,
draw is the
oh!
last draw.
He can do it. He can technically stay alive. Wait, oh no, because there's no
No,
board
there would not.
space.
Yeah, there's no
Right,
board
yeah.
space, unfortunately. So yeah, Nuff missing 1 credit. But oh yeah, no. Noan in fact does have that sheath in hand. It's gonna come down next turn, deal 4, and that is gonna be the game. I hope that we get to see this Legions deck again. Because it is really cool, and when it could actually find some Legions, I think that we might get to see it do its thing. But this first round was just not what Nuff wanted to see. Those Karashes are just not not effective at all in this matchup, especially when your opponent has seemingly all the fighters in their hand. Karashes.
Yeah. So it seems that the game froze, or the or yeah, or the spectator froze rather. We could see from Noan's hand perspective though that it clearly said that he won. And there's no confusion there. I am blown away at how consistently we're seeing these, early games getting in this damage into finding the elite fighter to finish the game off right on time.
Yeah, Sheeden kind of fell by the wayside for a good little while, but recently it's been back. I have really been enjoying it in my play. I think that it's a really solid card that kind of just gives you wins out of nowhere sometimes. And um yeah, but I think that Nuff is super favored in this matchup coming up here. Those 56 recons, the fact that you can use your 6 Blitz 1-drops plus your 356 recons to trade out with your opponent's things. Yeah, I would be very, very surprised if this didn't go to a game 3. But you never know. It is always possible that no one could find the aggressive tools that they need to get through, and Blitzkrieg is one of them. Is it worth it to just use it right here for an easy 9 damage? It might be, just to do it before Nuff has the opportunity to get those legions out.
Yeah, it'd be pretty bold, but the only other thing you can develop by trading is getting the T80 out, which isn't huge impact, and of course with pushes in the deck, it means that every bit of damage is relevant because you have the potential to find more later on.
Yeah, and no one is actually forcing Nuff to use the credits. No one knows that Nuff is probably going to play a Plan West here, but if you play the Plan West, then you aren't going to be able to attack with that recon, and those units are going to actually be able to trade off with the Plan West. So, a very interesting play from Noan. Very insightful, understanding how to force your opponent to have to make decisions. But Nuff does find a way to clear the board. This reworked version of SU is super interesting, giving all your other tanks heavy armor 1. It can create some huge problems, especially when you get them in multiples. I've played some games myself, I think maybe even against Noan, where my opponent has like 3 copies of this card, and so all the tanks have 3 heavy armor, and you're like, what do? I don't know. The minute that they get to the front line, it's really difficult to even get any damage down on them, let alone get through the front line. But Noan is not really drawing what they need. Those 20 seconds would be great in starting to generate some card advantage, but without any units to get to the front line, they're just going to be sitting back there for a while, and they are a little bit susceptible to any of Nuff's deal 1 damage effects, whether it be recon or something else similar.
And no one's really thinking hard about playing the second one. And Nuff almost certainly is gonna go for a Shenano here to try and deny the draw before it even happens.
Yeah, Nuff is able to play Yokosuka into Recon into Shinano, or is able to play the Plan West into the Recon. But I think it makes sense to deny the draw here. I do think that you you are correct there. But yeah, no, Nuff definitely has plenty of options. Their hand is significantly bigger and significantly more versatile than Noan's at the moment.
And these SUs just keep coming out for nothing, really. Like, it's an okay body on its own, but, you know, at this stage in the game, no one's really feeling like he needs to be hitting other tanks with that, and that could be the worst draw in Noan's deck.
The Iron from the North? Or the the 3-1.
The 3-1, yeah.
Yeah, especially right now. Definitely not what you need. Enough is able to clear it out, push a 3-3 to the front line, and then use that Iron from the North. You don't get to see that one every day. It's definitely not the most healing order that you could find off of Błyskawica. But I mean, 3 credits for 1 credit is pretty good. Netting 2 credits, especially when it allows you to push the front line. Very interesting.
Yeah, and 20 Panzergren is very potent here, and Nuff even giving the trade into the Screepery for the Scree one, which I was not expecting that little one drop to get that much value.
And here we're gonna start to see Nuff just close out the game. The fact that they have 2 draw engines online, they're gonna be drawing several cards a turn, they're gonna be making and buffing legions, and no one really just doesn't have anything that can deal with Tarnov in their deck. I'm gonna check one more time just to make sure that I'm not missing anything. But without Japan, without access to something like Sendai, the best that Soviet Germany has is Hammer, and Hammer is not quite enough to take out that Tarnov.
Yeah, and we see that spectator bug still persists, but no one surrendered there. Obviously not really anything that he can do. He's so dependent on getting that board control early to draw cards, to make his infantry bigger, to get blitzkriegs for high value. And Nuff just had too many answers early on that just stopped Noan from getting there.
Yep, it's a really cool iteration of legions. But as we move into our next game, we're gonna have this sort of hyper aggro style list against frontline, and I do think that whoever gets to start the game is gonna have a fairly decent advantage. Noan would really like to see some of those 1-1 blitzers to prevent a red doubles from getting to the front line, but no one doesn't find them, and conversely, Nuff does not find a red doubles that would pretty much halt no one in their tracks. So both players don't have the strongest start in the world, so it looks like it's going to be a pretty good game.
And no one's actually going to let Nuff hold this front line. He could have gone for a red dawn and push up, and knowing Nuff's hand, that would have been really good against the 22nd. Of course, no one is not privy to that information, and he probably wants to be a little greedy with the red dawns when you're running push in the same deck. But now it's an awkward situation.
Yeah, no one has the ability to either play a 35T or play the red dawn potentially, but it looks like they're hovering over the T80, which is a bit slow and gives enough access to Sherman, which is pretty important. Allowing enough to keep the front line allows red doubles, allows Sherman. I'm not sure that I 100% agree with the play, and Nuff kind of does punish it by playing this red doubles here.
Yeah,
And no one is starting to steer down a huge front line.
I'm very surprised, to be honest, because I would have thought the 35T would come down. You're able to clear the front line and take the front line with a 2-1, which potentially can prevent a draw.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. But yeah, this SU allowing this 35T to value trade, maybe no one was trying to set up for a big SU turn by dropping as many units as possible, and with the 3-2 T80, the SU basically allows it to trade with all of the 1-drops in Nuff's deck for free. But yeah, unfortunately, Nuff did kind of have the punish there and was able to clear some of those cards before that SU came down.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense for Noan's game plan, the line he goes for, but it's kind of disrespectful to this 22nd to, leave it around for so long.
Yeah, it's a question of synergy versus value or credit efficiency, or your opponent's deck. Would you rather both players get to do what their deck wants, or neither player get to do what their deck wants? It's how much do you think frontline cares about the frontline? And I'd say quite a bit. But believe it or not, I think there is a reason the deck is named what it is. But Noan, a couple turns later, able to push that SU into the front line with Heavy Armor 1. And that is going to be quite a challenge for Nuff to take out. The Schutzen is going to need that buff to get there. Very clever play by Nuff.
Yeah, a few options. And by a few, I mean mostly just two. There's that Schutzen option with the 164th, and then there's also the Hellcat.
Yeah, so no one looks like they're going to drop the T80 and then play the 35T into SU next turn, which, man, those tanks all having Heavy Armor 1, it's going to be super awesome. Really getting to see no one's deck do what it wants to do. And this is a really, really hard fought match. Every turn, the front line seems to trade. Every turn, the power balance seems to swing. The pendulum keeps going back and forth. And yeah, what a great match to watch.
That's 35T number 3, T80 number 2, SU number 2.
Yeah, but Nuff has those anti-tank cards in their hands. Unfortunately, you are going to have to wait if you want to use one of them to trade out with the SU. So instead it looks like Nuff just trading out with, making value trades, trading out with some of the smaller stuff and hoping to get some additional trades the next turn. Noan drawing all the draw in their deck. These 38 Ts replacing themselves is so huge. And we see Nuff potentially getting a little bit tilted.
Yeah, especially when, from his perspective, Noan left him with a US unit in the front line on turn 4 that he wasn't able to take advantage of with a Sherman.
Yeah, and there is the Sherman, but it's not gonna be able to draw, and so we're just gonna see it played regularly, hoping to get some value trades over the next couple turns.
Yeah,
But will it be enough? I sort of doubt it. It's definitely possible that Nuff isn't out of the game by any stretch, but it is gonna be a difficult position to claw yourself back from. You're gonna need stuff like your second copy of 20th Panzergran. I believe that it was Nuff that played a Panzergran, or
yes.
was it Noan?
Yes, he did.
Yeah,
Enough
okay,
for
so
the
you still have one
Panzergran.
more copy of Panzergran. That would really, really be helpful here. In fact, that alone would pretty much get you back into the game. But Frontline's draw is reliant on having the front line.
And obviously this Blitzkrieg is just a dud. Now, Noan's deck does have a lot of dinky units in it, like that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this really was either player's game. I think that they both made important decisions that influenced the outcome of the game. And I definitely feel like I don't want to say either player misplayed or anything like that, but I think that they made decisions and those decisions affected the outcome of the game. So, yeah, very, very cool game, very close, and no one gets there. 2-1, and we will see Noan advance to the semifinals.
We will hopefully get that bug with spectators sorted out sometime through this event. I know Mark Theus is in the back pressing all the buttons trying to make that work. But we got here. We have Noan going through, I think, sorry, to your point, a heck of a hard fought match. Back and forth. I think both decks, kind of worked well. I'm curious, Starry, now looking back at Noan's, decision to bring this strange Soviet list a little bit out of the blue. Like, how do you think it played out in this first matchup? Obviously, you got the win, but did it kind of work out as you expected? Was there anything unexpected in that deck, or how it was piloted?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there were a couple critical decision points, but I think that one of them was to kind of greed for this SU, try and get a big SU, give all of your tanks a heavy armor, and it didn't really work out for Noan, but I think that some of the plays that they made later on, some really critical top decking that second SU is pretty huge. Yeah, I think it was a quite interesting game, and no one always comes up with really creative lists. Always really cool to see what no one brings to the table. That Germany Japan combined arms is definitely a no one creation. So getting to see both that and this sort of new no one list, yeah, really cool.
And Berto, what do you think? Do you think there was a reason or a thought process behind Nolan's decision to say like, "Hey, I'm just gonna build something with Soviet. Like, there's a gap there. I'm gonna throw something together." Was that just Nolan being Nolan, or did they spot something, an opening maybe in the meta where they decided, "Hey, this could be of value in a tournament like this"?
Well, Noan always likes his hyper aggro, and I think that might have struggled a lot more against a control list. Anything that runs supply shortage would be a huge issue. But against these really popular mid-range decks, it's not too crazy to try to go under them. And this list that he's created, it looks like, the draws can come in the wrong order and, it doesn't quite work out. But, Noan tends to like these decks that, they have that risk of falling apart, but they have the highest peaks of, being able to do crazy things really early on as well. He likes that variation, I think, and just the possibility to just, almost win on like turn 3 if you get the absolute nuts hand.
High risk, high reward. Let's go jump into the bracket as we've got our semifinals ready to go here in the May OCC. We're going to thank Berto. We're going to welcome Thanatron back for this one, I do believe. And so we're going to have Spoker taking on Electrify in our first semifinal. Electrify defeating Kazow 2-0. Electrify's first appearance here as well, so keeping the dream alive. And then you see Noan having the hardest fought of battles in the quarterfinal, going through to face Morphling, also making their first appearance, having defeated Kazow 2-0. So we're going to have Spoker against Electrify coming up here. We're going to welcome Thanatron back as we dive into our first semi-final. Right on. Let's take a quick recap here and go take a peek at Spoker's deck lists. Starry, why don't you give us a quick run through as to what we are going to see here?
Sure. So their first deck list is a Germany-Britain combined arms list. And it is pretty standard. Combined Arms has gotten a small buff with 101st Infantry. You only usually play a couple, but the fact that it combos with those Fury units potentially is pretty nice. Next up, we have a US Britain ramp list playing P-51 Mustang, which we saw did a lot of work earlier. Very interesting inclusion. And then we see the Britain US ramp list, which is playing P-47D. I believe it's the big ass bird, I think is the nickname that it gets because of the text on the side. It's interesting that with the US list he chooses Mustang for that 6-cost plane, and with the Britain list he chooses P-47D for the 6-cost plane. Oh, sorry. He's also playing copies of Mustang as well. But yeah, just curious to see that the Britain list in particular is looking for that P-47D. But yeah, we've seen both of these lists work pretty well, and I'm curious to see if they're going to continue.
Let's flip over to Electrify's side. Thanatron, why don't you give us the walkthrough here? We have not seen Electrify yet, having their matchup be completed off stream.
All right, so the first thing we see is a German-U.S. Mid-range that we are pretty accustomed to by now. We see 4 copies of the War Machine, so trying to have a good turn 2, get out to those 4-drops, plenty of 4-drops. Kind of how that deck wants to roll. A big duress and a big dive bombing could be huge linchpins for how that deck wants to play out. Then we see a Japan Soviet deck here, which is again quite aggressive. A lot of small units, but also some burn from things like Last Rites and Push. And then our third deck is a big beefy Brit ramp list with ASW patrols and Electrify running a Commonwealth. So a little bit of a difference there. Electrify hoping to make use of that huge health total with an offensive order, as well as, just having a lot of health. Nice thing to have.
Always a nice thing to have. I wish I had more health. Would always be nice. Let's go ahead and take a look at the bans here and see what these players are going to have access to. So Spoker going to lose the Brit US ramp deck this time around, having lost the US Brit ramp in the first matchup. Electrify losing the Japan Soviet list. I am very, very curious about this one. Starry, let's have you kind of break this down for us. If you're in Spoker's shoes, what makes you decide that this aggro list, this Japan Soviet, not Jagro aggro list, what makes you ban that?
Yeah, so I think that you have functionally two decks instead of three. You have combined arms and then you have ramp, right? So your ramp lists could potentially get beaten down by some really, really quick high rolls, especially if you happen to go second. So that is always pretty scary. And if you're playing combined arms, then stuff like diplomatic attaché, stuff like just them trading into your units before you get a chance to buff them up, could leave you with like a bunch of buff spells without any actual gas. And so I think that in either of those scenarios, that the Japan deck is actually probably the most threatening to your game plan. It's unfortunate because I was really looking forward to seeing the Japan list. I love Diplomatic Attaché. It's a really cool card that we rarely get to see. One of my favorite cards in the game. But yeah, no, I think that Spoker absolutely made the right call on that one.
So let's flip to the other side then, Thanatron. You know, we saw the US Brit get banned in the first round. Berto talked, I think it was a little bit about how that's strange and you normally would want to go the other way. That's what Electrify did here, banned the Brit US list instead. Does that kind of line up in your head as well, that it makes sense to move that one out of the way?
Yeah, I would say so, especially with sort of what they're bringing to the table, and not having to worry about maybe the board clears or some of the extremely large end game units, especially how that can outclass mid range in that matchup specifically. But pretty interesting here. Both players going with maybe fast first punches. Spoker coming out with his CA deck right away.
Yeah, we see Spoker has a really strong start potentially, especially if off the mulligan they are able to hit a combined arms. But the fact that Electrify has Noshub into turn 2 35T into then getting to play 22nd on the same turn if they're able to destroy a unit, you have to be really careful as Spoker here.
Yeah, some really interesting starts for both players. That was a really interesting mulligan for Spoker. It felt like he kind of had thoughts about keeping a second Humber or the Heinkel. Ended up throwing both of them back, probably looking for a CA for that ultimate turn 2 SmackDown, but didn't get it and got another Humber back. So interesting to see how that plays out. Does he go just double infantry here and try to? I imagine you try to get both Humbers online. Is the play here for Spoker?
I would probably go for Jaeger into Parachute. I think double infantry might be better. I think that going for early damage is definitely pretty big. The only thing is, if your opponent has that one copy of Sudden Strike in their deck, then suddenly things get really sticky because they can go something like Sudden Strike into 35T, um, kill your Parachute if you go for that. So
Yeah, I like this
I don't
play
know.
from Spoker, taking the front line for the reason that you just mentioned, right? That Parachute would have been really weak to 35T, which would have generated Noxship dollars. So you could have got out of hand real fast. A 1-3 in the front line when it's only turn 2. You feel pretty comfortable with that. Uh, and if he can somehow get to turn 4 with both of those Humbers alive, then the damage output is going to be enormous.
Yeah, I mean Blitzkrieg would do 16. Um,
Math majors. That's why we employ them. Some of us just say damage will be enormous. Some of us figure it out.
and another Blitzkrieg. Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Now just has to be thinking about ripping one here
That's absolutely crazy. Um,
just for the damage.
I
If
don't
if
think, sorry, I
sorry, go ahead.
don't think you can afford to push up this Jaeger here because then your opponent will be able to trade it off with 22nd, net 1 credit, and then play one of their 4 drops. And you know that your opponent has stuff like Devil's Brigade, 5th Rangers, a lot of 4 drops with Blitz, um, or functional 4 drops in the case of Devil's Brigade.
Right.
And so I do think that you cannot allow your opponent to get Noxiv dollars, as you like to call it. But yeah, getting this second Hummer into the front line, doing 16 damage.
It
I
feels
mean,
like
that's pretty crazy.
oh, I do not love this line from Spoker here. I feel like there's going to be a lot of ways. Obviously, 35T is going to come down,
Yep,
which is
that's the
actually going to
very first thing we're
allow
gonna see.
some ramp generation as well. Yeah, and this is really going to help Electrify's chances here in the long run. If Spoker would have ripped off that first Blitzkrieg and left just a 1-3, it would have basically forced Electrify to have to go the 22nd and the 35T both into the Humber in the front line, which would have been a terrible turn for Electrify.
Yeah, but here's the
But
thing. I mean, Electrify
none of
has
that
to
might matter.
kill every single unit, which they're simply just unable to do. I mean, you can use the sudden strike on the back row unit. You'll still have the credits to 5th Rangers and trade off with one other thing, but that still leaves one more unit on the board. And when Spoker has Blitzkrieg, any of the units on the board are lethal. I mean, if you're Electrify, you can't expect the second Blitzkrieg when Spoker has only 2 copies in the deck and has drawn roughly 8 or 9 cards this game. So definitely unfortunate for Electrify, but yeah, Spoker managing to get there with combined arms. We haven't seen it in a tournament in a long time, but it sometimes does that.
Yeah.
So,
And sometimes it truly does, as much logic as you'd like to insert into the game, sometimes it won't matter if Blitzkrieg goes burr.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, the biggest issue for combined arms is that if you don't control the front line, your literal only way to get damage through is Comet. And I suppose Heinkel as well. I wouldn't necessarily call that meaningful damage. So that is its huge weakness. It's why it doesn't see a lot of tournament play, is because once you lose the front line, you lose the game. But if you can do that, if you can hold the front line the whole time, if you can prevent your units from getting Noshib dollared, then yeah, you can get there. So we're gonna
Yeah.
see Spoker left with their US Brit ramp list, and Electrify gonna need to decide between either playing a ramp mirror match or to run it back with the Germany US midrange. I think that I would rather go for the German US midrange here. But yeah, what do you say, Thanatron? What would you rather go for here?
It's really tough. You like that you don't feel bad about either, but you also probably don't love that you don't feel great about either. I
I
feel
was
like I would
thinking pretty much the
probably
same thing.
go mid-range as well in the hopes that it's really easy for ramp to just not draw their ramp, right? Like
hmm
everyone has brought ramp with huge pie-eyed ideals of smashing everybody and then just never drawn their ramp and gone home sad. So I think maybe you take mid-range for its consistency and hope.
Yeah, so Electrify does find that turn 2 War Machine, which is exactly what they were hard mulliganing for. They mulliganed all 4 cards in their hand with the objective of finding very specifically that War Machine. So, you know, it did pay off for them. But Spoker also has the War Machine, and Spoker is kind of ready to combat these Focke-Wulfs. Although the Focke-Wulfs are 5/5s, Spoker has this Mustang in combination with these copies of supply shortages. Or sorry, not supply shortages, supply priorities. And so if Spoker can manage to draw those, I can see a world where Electrify isn't really left with a whole lot. Um, Spoker looks like they are going to ramp again into a potential Gren Guards, and they can play Gren Guards and a direct hit. If Electrify goes for this 35T play, the direct hit will destroy the 35T as it has 0
Yeah.
operation cost. And that's really what you're looking to hit with direct hit. The reason that people are playing direct hit these days is in large part due to the prevalence of 20th Panzer Grenadiers, right? The fact that you're often staring down 4, 4, 5, 5, 6, 6 copies of 35T, one cost destroy target 35T, and then also has some, some use cases elsewhere is actually really good right now.
Yeah, the Zerstore are very big for that as well. Zerstore getting a lot of play. Spoker taking both copies of Direct Hit and then is going to probably play them in maybe even consecutive turns here to just get a ton of value, taking out 4/4s. Although this seems like a Focke-Wulf turn for Electrify for sure.
Yep, I don't really see any reason to do anything else. You could Panzer 3H, although I'm really not sure what you'd be looking to follow it up with, as your really only 2-cost cards are War Machine, and of course 35T, which would not get the deployment reduction, the deployment operation cost reduction effect.
And that is a huge Flying Fortress from Spoker. Able to know quite well that that is hitting exactly what he wants it to hit. I would imagine maybe we even see here for 7 Zerstorer and the Devil's Brigade, the 1 ping damage, taking out the 4/1. I have to imagine we see that regardless.
Yeah,
Yep,
that makes
and
sense.
Electrify thinks, that he's got a nice big fighter blocking, gonna do a good 3 damage, but very likely that the second direct hit coming out right away.
Yeah, these direct hits are a tech choice for sure, and it would seem that it is a correct tech choice. They're certainly putting in work in this matchup, and judging by the other decks that we've seen today, I feel like they're effective in quite a lot of matchups.
Yeah, Electrify probably happy to see all these FWs. Gonna be helpful for making sure that he's just not on a 4-turn clock to that guarded Flying Fortress.
Hmm.
That is going to really help him out here, but I would have to think that they are hopeful that these are going to have to draw something big like that. That Yag Bomber could be extremely helpful for getting that pesky
Hmm.
bomber off his back.
Yeah. The Yag Bomber bouncing the Gren Guards is something. But yeah, I really like this play from Electrify, right? It's playing into your Yag Bomber later. You're saying, uh, I'm preventing my opponent's Gren Guards from trading off with it immediately. It can't be attacked because I have a fighter protecting my support line, and then next turn I can Yag Bomber. The Flying Fortress is likely to be a 5/1. Yag Bomber the Gren Guards and take out the Flying Fortress with the 2/2. But if Spoker plays either Pathfinders or Glamour Boys, suddenly this plan is looking a little bit less
Goes with
realistic.
goes with the Mustang. The I have to imagine that 1 damage to always to set up the Mustang kill here on the 5/5 FW. But these tech choices for Spoker are coming in huge. I was curious if maybe he would wait a turn and get even more value if the Yag Bomber is to come out here. Obviously, the Mustang against the Yag Bomber is just a nice, clean, efficient kill. But no worries, doing the 1 damage to all, take out that FW, and that 5-turn clock that I mentioned half jokingly. It's not
Yeah,
it's
no,
not out of the realm of possibilities,
it's
and neither
very,
is
very
even.
realistic at this point, and the Mustangs did exactly what I thought they were gonna do, work in tandem with the supply priorities, and suddenly Electrify is not super happy with this board state.
It's such an interesting choice because I feel like a lot of players would look at that situation as like the fighter or just air unit that like I see the most right now is probably the FW. It's a big 5/5 fighter. The Mustangs 4 damage, it's not quite cutting that. It's not a kill. I'm gonna have to bring a whole nother card or a whole nother unit for that trade, something to get that last damage. And Spoker just being like, oh, 1 damage to all is always good. So like whatever, that's fine. I can make this work. And
Yeah,
instant payoff.
supply priorities has had such an impact on this current meta. Um, Mostly because although Winter Warfare is great and does the same thing, the fact that the US ramp package gets access to supply priorities is huge. The fact that you don't have to
Yeah,
play
enormous.
both US and Russia to have ramp and a copy of Winter Warfare has really changed the way that the game is played. I feel like when people, look at that card, nobody's like, "Oh wow, this is super busted," and will change the way that the game is played. But when you consider that, nations getting different things can have an impact on stuff like that. Yeah, it's a very, very strong card.
Spoker just going for the guts here. Hits him with the big fighter, guards the big fighter, kind of saying everything else is just whatever. I have you in my sights and I have this set up. What can you do to stop this?
Yeah, Electrify has to go for the Panzer 3H, but I can tell you, I've played the deck enough that there's really nothing in the entire deck. So you could find Duress to hit that Gren Guards, and then use your Yag Bomber to trade out with the 6/4. Oh, but then suddenly you don't have a fighter, and the V17 will kill you. So really, no matter how you slice it, there is just nothing in the entire deck that is going to do it. You would need both Serstorer and Duress. You'd have to draw both of them, and Panzer 3H only draws one card. So we are going to see Spoker complete the match with yet another 2-0.
Really, really incredible by Spoker. I cannot compliment them enough. We've seen that deck twice now. It's worked out both times, and both times we've seen very specific tech choices that we are not used to seeing not only come into play, but be extremely efficient and impactful. So, true sniper stuff, calling stuff way, way out. Really impressive by Spoker.
And that's the thing I want to point out, and not to take anything away from Spoker's gameplay or ability to pilot the decks that they've brought, but the tech choices have, like, they basically just won Spoker game two here, right? You're seeing the Mustang, you're seeing direct hit come out. Thanatron, can you maybe walk us through a little bit more of that mindset around what would make you decide to pack some of these cards? We talked a bit about Mustang and the FWs and all that, but any other sort of thought process you may think that Spoker went through when they decided to build the deck the way that they did?
Starry brought up a great point when the match was happening, right? About the 35T and how direct hit targets that specifically. And then also there's their stores. So I think what they did was just a really good job of identifying like what's really powerful in this meta as like a single card, right? Like what units or what like single resources are having like huge impacts or getting people wins. It's things like the German Sherman. It's things like Panzergren, which generates you that big 35T. And then it's things like Folkwolf, big fighters that are able to generate not only the draw, but then also the value of having a big 5/5 fighter. So he combats those directly, right? Like he takes these direct hits. He says, if you're going to have 2 extra giant 35Ts, then I'm going to take 2 instant kills for those cards. Obviously, like we mentioned, it's the things like your store float around as well. So there's more versatility than just that. Really, really excellent tech choices.
And Starry, is there a world where in this meta, in this tournament, those cards go from being an excellent tech choice to a liability? Like, is there a matchup where those are just sort of dead in hand and not bringing any value?
The direct hits, not so much. The Mustangs, absolutely. Mustangs are really expensive to play as a vanilla 6/4 fighter. And against some matchups like Jagro, It's not going to do anything. So you have to be really confident that the rest of your deck can get you there, especially against decks like Chagro, and that having the room and the time to play a 6/4 fighter, that you have the time. And I mean, so far Spoker has been right. In a tournament setting, you can ban Jagro, which you can't do on ladder, which is a notable difference. But yeah, very very good choices by Spoker so far.
And also a good read of the meta. We haven't seen necessarily as much Jagro today as we have in the past. We've typically seen in some scenarios every player bringing one version of it. And here we've seen a few sort of Frankenstein Jagro lists, but not exactly as much of the traditional that we've seen. So just all around excellent deck building, excellent read of the meta. And that is why we'll see Spoker in the finals. But let's bring up the bracket and see who the second player might be who will face Spoker in the final. So there we see them defeat Electrify 2-0. Of course, to Starry's point, no ban in the finals, so Spoker will have to find a way through the Jagros and those types of lists, but that will all depend on who they go up against, because we got Noan taking on Morphling here in our second semifinals. We're going to thank Starry for that matchup. Welcome Berto back in, but before we jump over to Berto, Thanatron, why don't you walk us through what Noan has here? We'll get back into the decks. We'll get back through them, get a quick recap, and stay tuned, everybody, because I know the card reveals are a very high priority piece for this event. They are going to come right before the finals. So we got one more matchup for you. Then we will break down a couple new cards for the covert operations expansion coming later this summer. But let's get into Noan's decks. Let's go through the just shenanigans that Noan is bringing here, Thanatron.
So first we see, this aggro list that is a little more out there than stuff that we are used to seeing. It is a Soviet aggro list with Germany, and it is bringing things like a single iron from the north to maybe try to steal some huge credit swings. We also have a uh, salvage list here that we haven't seen too much of. We see the scrap metal into Sally, which has been spoken about quite a bit today, but we haven't quite seen it. So it'll be very interesting to see if that gets banned or maybe we see that get pulled off. And then we have a German Japan, which is pretty strong as well. We've seen a lot of these just, sort of beefy mid-range decks, or something that maybe is even a little faster, maybe even somewhere between aggro and mid-range, or just mid-range. But Noan, obviously a very aggressive player, loves his aggressive decks. And we can definitely see that reflected.
Let's flip over to the other side. Berto, why don't you walk us through what Morphling is lining up with? Morphling winning that first matchup off of stream, so haven't seen any of their decks perform, but let's see what they got.
Yep, they have this German US mid-range list. We have a Britain US ramp with the Commonwealth win condition, and we have US Germany frontline. So all three decks running US, which is a little interesting.
Why don't we jump into the bands then and see, what these players are going to be able to bring into this semi-final. So Noan is going to lose that Jalvage list, and then if you're Morphling, you do not get access to the Brit US Commonwealth deck. As per usual, let's go ahead and break some of these down. Berto, if you're in Noan's shoes and you're looking at Morphling's lineup, right, you've got that, you've got US all over the place. You got the US front line. You've got the Germany US mid range. What would make you decide, let's ban that slower, more, I guess, control heavy deck here?
Uh, I mean, mostly supply shortage, I think. I mean, his decks are just so vulnerable to that card. He doesn't really have things that are very great against board clears. The heavy armor from the SUs suddenly stops being very relevant. And also the Commonwealth is going up against Gree decks that all have no way to give your HQ bonus defense. So I think it just makes a lot of sense to take that out.
Yeah, we simplified it down. It just makes sense to say that, right? Noan's decks are all mid-range or faster, and can probably try and squeeze underneath some of what Morphling's got. But that Commonwealth deck, if it draws well and can slow him down early game, that's probably just a sure thing, right?
Most of the time. I mean, most of Noan's decks can have a hand that's nuts enough to beat almost anything, but that's not the normal outcome.
That's fair. That is no one's MO. We talked about it before, right? That high risk, high reward style. And so if you're morphling Thanatron and you're looking at no one's list, and you've got, again, those mid-range or better types of lists, which one are you most concerned about? You go ahead and you're banning the Jalvage list in this scenario. Is there something specific about that Jalvage list that sort of has it standing out in with those other two?
I'm not really sure. I think in their place, I might have thought about banning the mid range. Sorry, I'm looking to the left here, kind of looking at the deck list as I think about this. So definitely some hard choices. I think what is kind of wild here is what Morphling has to go through, right? Morphling had to play their first match against Kazow, and now going right into Noan. A lot of strange decks. Noan obviously bringing his very aggressive style decks that are sort of things that live even when you see them on ladder as like, oh, that's a Noan deck. Like I don't even know if I've seen Noan play that, but I bet that person got that from playing Noan. Like it just has that sort of air about it of what it is. So if Morphling's able to make a finals here in their first appearance, obviously taking down No and Five is taking down a huge name, right? That's incredible. But like just the sort of full gamut of the decks that they're going to have to run through here to get there is also going to be really impressive and show like a really strong versatility for them, especially in their first tournament.
Absolutely. And, Berto, you brought up earlier, right? When you're looking at your bands and you're trying to figure out, hey, do I take out the thing I know? Do I take out the unknown deck? Or do I assume the unknown deck would be known if it was a better deck than the other deck? So, you're kind of in this scenario now where Morphling looks at it and goes, all right, Soviet, Germany, Japan, Finland, sure, Jalvage is the thing. That German Japan mid-range deck is probably the most common one. Do you have any thoughts around why that band may have fell the way it did?
Yeah, so he took out the Jalvage deck from Noan, and I think that makes a lot of sense because he's probably expecting his Britain ramp to get banned, right? And at that point, with the two decks you're left with, there's a lot of really good out of the mist targets. And Noan's running 4 copies of Out of the Mist. And so you really don't want your 20 Panzergren getting out of the misted, or you don't want your 1-drops getting out of the misted, your 164ths. So I think both players banned the right thing.
Well, we're gonna find out if they did as we jump into our second semifinal here of the May OCC.
I think this is the matchup that no one wants.
Right.
Um, just because I
One of
feel like the frontline deck it just starts doing things a little bit earlier. It doesn't take the turn to ramp.
Yeah, when you bring something that's like fast like this, I feel like you are kind of chomping at the bit for a matchup against something slow, right? Like you want to go under something. Obviously, if you have to play like an aggro versus aggro or something like that, or even versus mid range, but like the slower that the other deck is the longer that you kind of feel like you have to get under. So
And that Nakshub is critical, even though Morphling doesn't actually have anything to use with it on turn 2. No one's so scared of 35T into War Machine or double 35T that he opts to not play any units until he's able to kill it using a sickle and a red dawn.
yeah,
And
quite a bit of resources, but you definitely worth it, right?
yeah, I mean, it wasn't worth it in this game for Noan, but he can't know that.
Right. Sorry. So
Yeah.
in the context of you do it every time.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, certainly always interesting, to think about these things from our seats upon high. The hindsight, no, I guess not hindsight, but the seeing both sides, right? Almost makes all the things that you've ever been paranoid about on ladder seem like paranoia. Like, why am I ever worried about those things? Look, they never happen.
So I don't know if Morphling's going to go for it, but I think this 5th Ranger should be an 8/8 actually. Just because it's almost like the last card left in his hand. Like, the rest of these are so low impact. If he doesn't get some FWs or some Pains or 3 Hs, he's going to run out of steam really quick, and that gets Noan back into this game. If you go for an 8/8, you're still able to play one of these 2-cost cards next turn while moving or attacking, which
Yeah,
you could maybe be looking at sudden strike on the 1/2 in the front line, so you're able to push up your 8/8, force your opponent to put some removal into it.
yeah, definitely interesting. Given what we know on both sides, once again, yeah, it does seem like you'd get much more utility out of that 8/8. I wonder if Morphling is thinking that he sort of needs to maintain the tempo. Looking at Noan's deck, right, it is kind of hard to get a gauge for it, especially if you haven't played against it, because there are a lot of very tiny, fast units, but then there's also things like the 2 SUs in his hand right now, those generally not something that you might consider like an aggro card or very fast card. Obviously, the buff can be quite powerful. Uh, but maybe hard to gauge sort of how much you need to worry about the tempo play. And that caused him to maybe overvalue the front line, but definitely worth thinking about both ways.
Yeah, it is really hard when you're playing against these sorts of decks to know when you want to try to sort of transition between playing for max tempo so you don't die early on into starting to play for a little more value, because that's kind of what your deck is trying to do.
And this, of course, being a semi-final, right? Your first round matchup, you can go to your best practice partner. You can be like, it's Friday night or Saturday morning, depending on where you live. Like, decks are submitted. This is the exact lineup of my opponent, right? Like, let's play. Like, please play these 3 decks into me. Let me get all these reps. Let me know exactly what I'm up against, what I need to do. But certainly harder to do that for a semifinal, right? You either need to prepare for both possible opponents, knowing that half of that preparation will be total waste, or you need to like guess correctly, and then just look at the matchup, and maybe for Morphling, knowing such a great player is, you probably expect him to maybe win his matchup, so you can maybe prepare for him specifically. But I don't know that a lot of players would go to that length, especially since he might not even be there. So if you haven't seen these no index, playing them for the first time, gotta in a big tournament, gotta imagine it's a task.
Egg Farmer is a little awkward. Like, yeah, you kind of want to sudden strike this guy right away, and then like you want to hit one of these SUs, but at the same time you really don't want to hit one of these SUs.
Right. I think maybe we still. Oh, No, I don't think you want to do the suppressed one.
It shouldn't matter, right? Because it was
Oh, the
given
heavy armor
heavy
was
armor
back.
again. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, so truly just made it right back into basically the same unit. Very
And
interesting.
35T here is huge.
Yeah,
Because you get the
basically gonna
trade-off with the 4-2, and then this
right.
SU can kill the Yagged bomber.
Interesting. Gonna play for pressure instead. Big Core Sun means I am not really afraid of you smacking me down. Now Morphling, yeah, with
Unless
the big suppress. But the problem here is that 5 is not 8.
big if
So
true.
and with a tank in the back line, that's one of those planes dead. He makes this trade. No one's gonna have to find 2 damage to put into the other plane here. You know? A lot of ways he could find it, a lot of ways he could not find it.
Yeah, I mean, a Blitzkrieg would be pretty crazy. And that's not it.
Absolutely not. And if you're Morphling, you make that play every time, right? Like, I mean, it's, there's no other play to make is to, play to that out. You see the state of the board and you're just like, all right, like I have an out here. I'm going to take it and I'm going to hope that he can't deal with these 2 fighters. And he can't. And that is a huge win for Morphling, putting Noan on the ropes, trying to make his first OCC final.
Yeah, and if no one kills both fighters, there's still the big risk of an FW coming down and not being able to kill it, or finding that comet.
Yeah, absolutely. We've already seen comets impact today, with like the most exact lethal that anyone could possibly get, the turn 6 comet when they have 4 damage or 4 health.
Yeah, that
Just
was
just the all the curves beating in the middle, the planets aligning.
yeah. And even if no one was able to deal with that board, based on what I've seen today, I have no doubt that the next card on top of Morphling's deck was Comet.
So here we go, right back into it. So we've got Morphling on a pretty standard US front line, and we have the start that he would like to see, right? With the Red Devils down 1. But that is what Noan's deck is designed to do. Literally called hyper aggro. Well, this isn't the Soviet Japanese versions considered hyper aggro, right? But like these are the hyper aggro cards, and able to, despite going second, steal the front line from front line. That could be enormous.
Yeah, and I would love to see this 164th come out from Morphling, because it lets you clear the front line, which kind of forces this 1-2 to move up to deny the front line from Red Devils.
Which
But
possibly
it's
means no unit on the turn from Noan, but not the line that Morphling offers. He did draw into a 1-drop Noan, but to your point, that could have been such a great turn because with no front line, you spend that 1 credit to move the 1-2 into the front line to try to deny it to US on turn 2. But if you don't have a 1-drop, that's a not fun turn 2.
well, and you still can't move the other 1-drop into the front line, right? So I don't think it's a huge deal. And the other thing is 35T, but I I don't know if this line is better into 35T either. It's pretty close. And now, there's no way to guarantee a 164th buff onto the Red Devils this turn. Maybe forces Morphling's hand to use the 35T.
Nope, it's going to take his
No?
50-50. You certainly want it on the Red Devils. Obviously, if you can get people to double trade, then that's a massive credit sink because of the Red Devils text. And being a 2/4 would put it would outclass it against that tank. Gonna just make the 35T trade. Knows that he gets the 2 damage to face anyway from the destruction. Not looking too bad for Morphling, but it's not necessarily going as perfect as it could.
Yeah, it's not terrible, but without the buff onto the Red Devils, it's so much harder to get the Sherman draw this game.
Yeah, you really want that, that 2-4 Red Devils in the front line. You know that thing is probably going to be there for more than one turn, right? And that is so helpful when that's your entire draw engine is US units in the front line to trigger those Shermans. Just in case you're new around these parts, not familiar with one of our, I mean, at this point, probably the most ubiquitous draw engine of cards.
Yeah, it's that or Convoy, right?
Yeah, I guess Convoy would. It's Convoy just is draw, but yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah, I guess it's not necessarily an engine, it's just a...
These are some very silly semantics, though. Schutzen's a good
And
draw next turn, not a great draw this turn.
oh, and he's...
I might have just I'm so sorry. I might have just sat Schutzen down in my support line, knowing that I'm not going to get the blitz, but not being really afraid of a turn 4 Soviet deck with some slow infantry of my Schutzen getting dismantled to a point where I'm not going to get that payoff. I think
Yeah,
I
I
would have been
mean,
credit efficient there.
you don't really need to be worried about Blitzkrieg yet, unless Noan also happens to have his Blitzkrieg. Sorry, you don't have to be worried about Blitzkrieg unless he has Iron from the North and a Blitz tank, which I think has to be 35T.
Yeah, Pathfinders could be huge here, right? Because with a 1-2 in the front line, Pathfinders is actually going to allow for the double trade. Very rare. Usually you don't see the Pathfinders blitz go off because people would like to maintain that ability to make all those units retreat. Almost forces the 35T here from Noan, I would imagine. Unless he wants to truly do some shenanigans here, he can throw down the German Sherman, that big Panzergren, and he could hope that that's the card that gets returned to his hand. Start collecting free combined arm Panzers.
Yeah,
But
even 35T into the Red Devils plus Yak, then that's pretty... It's a pretty good spot for Noan, with Morphling only really having a 1 in 3 to get the bounce that he's looking for, right?
yeah, that's certainly a good point. And this way, sorry, as he made this decision, just in anticipation, my whole brain dropped out. Yeah, no, I'm not quite sure that's the correct decision. He would there's no way for Morphling to retreat both and give him the ability to move up the Red Devils and play the Sherman for his draw, right? So, uh, he could of course Schutzen and take it the front line or something like that, but it wouldn't have enough to get the draw as well, which I think is what is important. The whole key to this game is going to be Morphling being able to generate something out of those Shermans.
Yeah, there is also the aspect of, things like 22nd and 99th, which are things Noah needs to keep in mind. And that's the only US unit still around being moved up to the front line, but so vulnerable to the Yak 7, and the Yak 7 gets its draw off.
Even right here, just taking out the Red Devils and playing the Snowstorm basically denies the draw completely for a whole nother turn. Opting instead here, though, for the Panzergren, which is basically just never a wrong play at this point.
Yeah, he gives the front line and the opportunity for a really powerful strategic bombing, but that is simply not what Morphling has to work with.
Morphling instead going to get his own Panzer. I gotta imagine you have to take out that Yak. That extra draw for no is gonna kill you.
Yeah, I think probably, but
Right in the
you
5-year
could have
plan for no.
pushed up both infantries with the idea of 35T, 35T combined arms blitzkrieg,
Truly gone for
which
it.
but it
Would have probably been stopped by Corson, but again, obviously Morphling, no way of knowing that that huge guard is waiting in the wings.
yeah. And 99th is a US unit. It does not have blitz, which is very relevant, but
Noan also kind of running out of steam here, though. Obviously, that 5-year plan, huge, right? But like, it's looking like Noan is going to have to 5-year plan. While Morphling is basically able to just set up what he hopes to be a very nice German draw turn next turn. I gotta imagine 99th is going to come out. Of course, the 5-7 is going to trade nice into the 5-5. But no
yeah.
blitz units yet for no to take that front line back.
So I mean, I think you have two main options here. You can 35T and 99 fit and combined arms it just to make a 6/6 to try and control the front line. Or you can do 99 and blitzkrieg to just deal with the Coruscant right away. Is what Morphling opts for. And just
Interesting. I think
engineers is so important to be able to even play the 5-year plan.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we first mentioned the 5-year plan, it was 6 health ago. So basically free at this point. 5 free cards and a health to boot.
Yeah, and I like starting with the 5-year plan over the ability to go for 38T because I feel like there was a really good chance that you want to play Snowstorm this turn.
Yeah,
He
absolutely.
still
And
does.
I've heard draw first is a good thing from somebody one time. Of course, 5th Rangers, you make that an 8/8. Certainly it's not really caring about that snowstorm. Same for it no matter what.
Yeah, but still just if that 99th gets to attack and you put an 8/8 5th Rangers in the front line instead of having it
Iron
sit
from
here all sad in the back.
Iron from the north when holding the Panzergren. This is a play here. This is going to have ramifications.
Truly the darkest timeline.
Here we see it right back up to 5 big credits. The SU comes down. We've got heavy armor on that tank and an extra damage. No, it does not. Does not take the combined arms.
Yeah, you don't really need it. And oh, this 164th, he just doesn't do anything. Give one of your units +1/+1. Okay, whatever.
If there was one less unit in the front line, he'd be so excited to see it, but just still unable to get anything out of these Shermans.
Yeah, and I mean that goes to show the forethought of Noan on this turn opting to push up that Panzergren rather than making his tank bigger, potentially getting a little damage, because that would have opened him up to the Sherman, but instead he prevents it.
Absolutely, and in one huge turn, basically an OTK here for Noan, and we are going to see a I lost my train of thought there. We're going to see a final match here out of this best of 3. Finally, after a whole host of O2s.
And Noan is left with this Germany deck, this this German-Japan combined arms list, which is going to be pretty scary, especially with that one copy of Naval Supply Run. There's some pretty brutal boards he can make early on. Although he doesn't run Blitzkrieg, so Morphling might not have to worry so much about that same sort of lethality from last game.
That in the Navy making its appearance. We get one appearance of in the Navy per OCC right now. It's been great.
And Noan, he's going first, and he has two Type
Two
94s and
TKs.
a 22nd.
And hey,
And
if I'm able to establish that board, then you probably can't deal with the autocannon I'm going to drop on turn 3.
yeah,
Goes for draw rather than more frontline here. Can't really blame him.
if man, Type 94 having free attack because you go first, so that this
Definitely
Greyhound
looms so
can't
large.
survive. Oh, it's so brutal.
Certainly thinking about the autocannon. Panzer 35T and TK early, doubling the units in the front line would also be a great play and worth considering. I assume that's kind of what went through his head. And since we didn't see that, we're going to see a very large 5th Ranger. Or, I'm sorry, Devil's Brigade.
Oh, it hurts so bad. I mean, I think it's the right play for Morphling. Noan only has one copy of Sudden Strike in his deck. It's the only good answer to this. But he just already has it.
Yeah, really disappointing. I actually reacted to the top deck of that 99th, but Morphling was already holding the other 99th. But now just wiped out here with brutal efficiency. I imagine you perhaps, yeah, get rid of the draw. Not too bad. Would really like to maybe find his Pathfinders. The Devil's Brigade ping damage could also be helpful. Also, if he can just keep that back 35T, or I mean the first 35T either way, 99th again combining with that. But yeah, the artillery. I'm flummoxed just watching. I can't even get my words right. That artillery is a problem.
And Noan, I think rightly, is not playing for max value out of the 35T to reduce the operation cost, not going for just credit efficiency with a Panzer BH or Restorer. Instead, just keeping this front line away, making sure there's just nothing Morphling can ever do. And just smothering him with that that artillery.
That M10 is probably going to have to come out on the autocannon just to kill the ping effect. Just be even it's already going to be close if Morphling's able to not bottom out here. But 2 or 3, 4 extra pings might be the difference. No one just going for the throat. We're just going combined arms. We're going to the face. Blood in the water. He smells it.
Yeah, and this sort of prevents strategic bombing from being an answer because, if you play it on this turn, you just die.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really, really great point. Morphling never finding it in either game, but just very astute observation, Berto, to highlight how well Noan is playing around almost any option that Morphling could have. I have to imagine this turn, Skytrain, probably not the answer. I would have to imagine this turn is M10 and trade, and then just throw out your 22nd just to have another unit.
I think if he's playing a Skytrain, it's essentially saying, I think that I need to hit Jasko to win.
Yeah, see, this line he only has to play 2 units to win, right? Sorry, I sort of interrupted you there. I apologize, but like obviously no one only has 4 drops, so this isn't like a possible line. Oh wait, yeah, no, it is because the
yeah.
German Sherman. It is the exact line. Yeah, I those ping damages don't seem like much because they have to sort of add up. It's that 1,000 paper cut death, but I think you had to silence I'm sorry, not silence. You had to suppress.
Suppress the autocannon.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, of course. Guns don't speak.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to say once you get into those situations, right? Because all of your lines have less than a 1% chance of getting you there, which comes up sometimes, and it's good to play for that, and which is what he's going for. But to analyze those tiny, tiny margins is really hard as well.
Yeah, real masterclass stuff from Noan in that match through the whole thing. Really, really impressive.
And that just goes to show why he's constantly present here at the OCC and why he's going to be in our finals today. But before we get there, we promised you a card reveal. So let's go ahead and dive into exactly what we got here. I see Berto's pumped. I see Thanatron's pumped. I know Starry's a little upset she's not here right now. Let's dive into it though and get rocking and rolling. So there you have the 121st Infantry Regiment. Blitz 5/4 destruction. Add an outrage to your hand, which then develops a retribution, of which there are 12 if I am informed correctly. And develop essentially will allow you to select one of, it's 3 that are randomly displayed on the screen, correct?
Yes.
So you're going to go ahead and snag 3 of them, or one of 3 out of that pool of 12. So we're going to have those come up here in just a moment. Then maybe we'll have Thanatron, you and Berto break these down. So there are 2 potential retributions. I believe these are the first 2 that have been presented. They're both 2 credits, deal 5 damage to a target unit, or deal 2 damage and draw a card. So you are not guaranteed to get either of these. So situation dependent, you may find exactly what you need, or you may not. Thanatron, why don't we start with you? What are your thoughts on this reveal and how you get to these retribution cards?
So definitely some cool stuff here, right? 12 retribution cards is a ton, and you're going to see 3. So you are going to be presented every time with what is that, a quarter of the pool. So your odds are decent, right? As long as there's a lot of decent retribution options, then you're going to have a good chance of finding something very useful, and that's going to come in handy. But like you said, perhaps not always. As for the unit itself, it's standard. So it's not necessarily something that's going to automatically make a huge impact. But the fact that it does generate a retribution, and the fact that it has blitz both are very, very useful. I believe it was a 5 drop with a 1 op. Is that correct? So
Yep.
turn 6 is not a place that the U.S. has a ton of big blitz options. Obviously, California is one of them, but a little more to the wayside these days. So perhaps maybe that gives some new utility to more expensive U.S. units. What do you think, Berto?
I think that this card could actually really fill a similar role to California. California's fallen a bit out of style since the nerf, and since people have been running a lot of removal that's good against the California, like Brew the Breach, like Bloody Sickles. But this guy, you don't really care if it dies right away when it trades. If it survives for a little bit, your opponent uses removal on it, that's great too. And then you get these retribution cards, which you can see from the 2 there that these are, cards that are punching above their weight. They're better than any cards in the game that you're able to put automatically in your deck. 2 credits for 5 damage to a unit. That's an insane rate. compared to things like From the People, or Hammer or those sorts of effects. And then 2 damage to, I think it was to anything. I think it can hit your opponent's HQ as well and draw a card for 2k. That is also obviously really, really powerful. So, and these are also cards that you'd probably like in a like a ramp deck. US ramp often doesn't have a lot of removal, and if the other retributions are giving good effects like this for US, then it could be really potent to play this guy on a turn 5 or something and trade because you ramped a little earlier. And 5 attack is like a really important break point as well. Things like Schutzen. Yeah, I think it's a really good card.
Winter Regiment as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Interesting as well. There is that 1 credit bump in the road between them, right? It generates that doesn't generate a retribution. It generates a 1 credit order that then generates a retribution as well, right? So, that is going to loom large. If the cheapest retributions are 2 credits, then obviously this isn't a turn 7 play. You're gonna have to wait till turn 8 if you're trying to do that whole thing. So it'll be also really interesting to see how annoying that one little bump is between playing the unit and then also getting some instant payoff out of the order, as well as maybe even instant payoff out of the blitz. Now we're talking about possibly 9 credits, right? So to your point, ramp and control, getting a US card like this could be very cool. Standard as well, could carry a lot of them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It just gives you that added layer of flexibility, right? Where you do have something coming out of it. So you don't feel bad if it dies right away. If you've got the credits to float, you can use the extra 1 credit, 2 credits for some flexibility there. So definitely curious to see what the other retribution cards look like and how you can develop those as well, because there will obviously be more cards in the expansion, I imagine, than just these that pull from that 12 card pool. So more to come here, but let's get into our finals. Let's get into what we have been here for. We bid Azure to Thanatron. Thank you for a wonderful day of casting. As we bring the bracket back up here, we'll swap out the chairs and get Starry locked and loaded. So there you've got Spoker versus No in 5. This is actually the first and second seed, so all is right in the world today in cards. Spoker defeating Head 2-0, defeating Electrify 2-0, making it here to go up against No in 5, who had a little bit of a tougher series throughout, having to go to game 3 both times. But here we will move to a best of 5. You'll have to win with all 3 of your decks. It is conquest format, and there is no more ban. So we are going to go ahead and bring it back. And I think Starry was distracted because she was making fun of me saying Edzure in some weird slangy Anglophone way, probably.
Yeah, very cool new card. A 5/4, 4/5 standard. It reminds me kind of a lot of 5th Rangers. It's more expensive than the small 5th Rangers. It's cheaper than the big 5th Rangers, but having the sort of versatility that you're going to get from Retribution. I mean, we haven't seen all of them, but um, yeah, I could see this card being very, very strong.
And it's a great way of bringing up that comparison, because it really does sort of fit in between. But in reality, it will go to that 8 cost, that 9 cost if you are going through with, I'm going to play it, I'm going to blitz, I'll play the outrage, I'll get the retribution. Like, you're just breaking it up in a different way than just having the one big body on the board. So you do drop that, 8/8, and it gets knocked out right away. You feel pretty bad. This one, you don't feel so bad because you got some leftovers that you can go ahead and use to hopefully impact the game a little bit. So yeah, very excited to see how the rest of this set shapes up around it. But before we get there, we have the finals to deal with here. So let's go ahead and bring up the deck list for one final time. Let's take a quick look at Spoker here and see what their lineup looks like. We've seen Spoker a couple times here now. So Starry, why don't you just give us a quick recap of what we're expecting to see from Spoker in the finals?
So Spoker's first list is a Germany-Britain combined arms list. It is playing Hummer, looking to buff it with combined arms. potentially 101st, and try and finish the game as quickly as possible through dealing absolutely insane damage with Hummer. The next list is a US Britain ramp list. It's playing some really interesting cards. We've gotten to see Direct Hit, we've gotten to see P51 Mustang. And these cards have been really putting in work, really, really cool choices, and we're going to see how they work into Noan's lists. And then lastly, we have a Britain US list, and it isn't playing Commonwealth. Instead, it's just playing really good, solid value units like B-17 Flying Fortress, again 2 copies of Mustang, and 1 copy of P-47D. Um, Not a card you see every day, but it has been working really effectively so far. So yeah, I mean, I don't think that Spoker has lost a game as of yet. But yeah, Spoker is blazing a trail to these finals right here, and he's got his work cut out for him because it is Noan after all.
That is pretty darn spot on. Has not lost a game yet. We're going to see if Spoker can do the same to Noan. Let's take a look at Noan's lineup. Berto, give us a quick run through.
So we have this insane hyper aggro Soviet German. We have Jalvage, and we haven't even seen a Sally discarded yet. But I'm sure we'll see Noan get a scrap metal onto these Sallys in the series. And finally, we have the German-Japan mid-range deck.
Right on, Berto. Thank you for that. We have, again, no bans here. So both of these players going to bring all 3 decks. Going to have to win with all 3 decks. We've been talking quite a bit about Spoker and their meta choices. And I think that, Starry, you were the one who had brought up that, the Mustang, for example, will struggle against a Jagger list that doesn't run anything in the way of planes. How do you think Spoker's meta choices and tech choices are going to play out here in the matchup against Noan?
I mean, I think that Direct Hit is going to continue to be good. I think that Mustang is probably going to struggle, especially against the Russian tank list that Noan has brought. I mean, that card is pretty dead in the matchup. So I don't know. I guess we'll see, but after watching this tournament, I think I'm going to be slotting Direct Hit into some of my lists because it seems really, really strong.
And I think to your point, it seems like it is very valuable in just about every matchup. You're going to find something to use it in. It likely won't be a dead card. Might not get a ton of value, but it will do something or other. And now, so Berto, on the other side of things, right? We've seen Spoker's ramp decks get banned, one or the other, in both the first 2 matchups that we saw Spoker play in. Noan obviously gonna have to go up against both of them here. Noan's deck's moving pretty fast. Is it going to be a question of Noan trying to get that quick start, get in underneath, and not have to deal with some of the ramp and some of the slow down tools that Spoker will have to kind of control the board?
Yeah. So Noan is not a player who believes that supply shortage exists. He likes to play like my deck plays into supply shortage, right? So I'm gonna play my deck as if you don't have supply shortage because I'm too worried about you not having it and I just lose anyways because I haven't managed to do anything, right? If you're playing around supply shortage the whole time. That's at least how I've interpreted what I've seen from Noan 5 in the past. Um, and so I think he's going to go all in, and, that gives him a very real chance in the early game.
It's the concept of, if I play as though my opponent has the card in hand, then he might as well have the card in hand, right? If I
Yeah.
play as if he doesn't, then we're going to find out. They better have it. Otherwise, I'm going to win.
But Noan has 39th this time into Humber,
Yep,
which is
if you can survive that long, it did single-handedly swings the game. It's a pretty huge deal. Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine 2 players who are more deserving of being in this grand finals. I think that Spoker's deck choices have been absolutely phenomenal this tournament. They have come up with some really, really strong tech choices that have landed them here. And while no one has extremely creative lists that people might not necessarily be prepared for, which I think is, if you can build a strong list that people aren't prepared for, great, fantastic. But I think that the reason why no one is here is an absolutely unbelievably precise level of play. I mean, talk about the last match where Noan played against the front line with this exact tank list. The lengths that he went to prevent his opponent from getting the front line in really creative ways, sometimes being not credit efficient. I mean, it was really, really unbelievable levels of play. And yeah, I'm just so happy that both these players, that their good play, good deck building decisions paid off, because they absolutely deserve it.
And Spoker last turn, he kind of called out Noan. I don't think you have a second 35T here, because if Noan did, and he trades into that bomber, Spoker would be for a world of hurt. Thankfully, that's not quite how it plays out. He still has a good 2-drop to play. That's still very important. Enables
Yeah,
him to play this Corson potentially.
exactly. I mean, this Corson stops the Hummer. After the Blitzkrieg, Spoker is still going to push through 7 damage, but the Corson into the 39th, I mean, no one's game plan is really, really clear here. You even get to play an extra Blitz unit to reduce the cost of Corson. You just get to play out your hand even quicker.
Yeah, I mean, no one's able to play around Blitzkrieg if he trades in this tank early, but he opts not to, which is pretty fair. You don't know about this Blitzkrieg. You don't know about the other Panzer II-A, and he's also kind of trying to preserve the defense on this Hummer at the same time, because he's thinking about taking it for himself, right?
Yeah, I mean, so no one doesn't have any more guard units. That Corson is literally it. And Spoker is going to be able to get potentially 2 spoils of war. The odds that Spoker is able to find a comet within those 2 spoils of war, plus let's say like 2 natural draws, because I think it's going to realistically take Noan at least 2 turns to clear the front line and present lethal, right? So let's say
Yeah.
Spoker draws 2 cards naturally, gets to look at 2 spoils of war. The odds that Comet is within them is far from 0. I mean, it's not
It
guaranteed.
would be
It's about a third, I think, roughly.
like 8 in 30 or so, I think, right?
Yeah. So I mean, and that's like a best case scenario for Spoker, even if that isn't exactly what happens. It's not like Spoker's out of this game. Yeah, 35 Ts.
Well,
Oh
not
well,
great
after
into
snowstorm,
Snowstorm. Yeah.
not great. So probably just gonna see spoils of war.
Ooh,
Ooh,
it has to be
autocannon.
autocannon, and then yeah, I think you actually hit the HQ, because that means if
If
Spoker
you
moves
draw
up the
any unit,
tank, no,
yeah,
if Spoker moves up the tank and kill this Heinkel, then you can just autocannon Panzer 35T into the T80, and no one's just
yeah,
dead.
and if you're right. And if Spoker doesn't move up the tank, then I don't really see them being able to kill this Heinkel. You could 39th it, I guess. Um,
Yeah, or you can
but
20
that's
Panzergren and
still
35T.
yeah, but that still gives Spoker like half their deck in top decks as far as instant win buttons. So yeah, I mean, checks out.
Oh, this now this makes it a little more awkward. That's also a solution for Noan. Oh,
That is
never
not
mind.
one of the instant win buttons.
Oh no, if Smoker just wins. Because with the dive bombing, he's able to kill the
Oh,
T80
true.
that
Yeah,
went
with
down.
yeah, exactly. That you do have that 7th credit to dive bombing the T80 and then 35T into it, and that is going to be game. And there you go, a match of 2 hyper aggro lists, and somehow, although Spoker lost the front line, with Autocanone, they were able to push through that last tiny bit of damage. And unfortunately, Noan just didn't really have the time to get down 39th, and that's really what you kind of have to do as combined arms. You have to kill them before 39th is a safe play.
Yeah, and that could have gone a lot differently as well if Noan finds an engineers.
Oh
As
my
well would
gosh,
have
that
been
would
a
have
huge card.
completely changed the game.
Yeah. Noan could have played around what Spoker had by trading that one turn that the Humber got in for 7, but like you're playing against 2 specific cards pretty early into the game. Your opponent didn't have a huge hand, it's a hard thing to argue for when the 39th in your hand is the thing you know about. And this matchup surely is good for Spoker, I think, especially with that Pioneer.
Yeah, if you're going, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's always the case, but I think that if you start with Pioneers, you have that direct hit. I mean, yeah, I definitely don't think it's bad for Spoker. That carpet bombing, when that carpet bombing comes down, gonna be great. The question is Spoker gonna top deck the things that they need to either A, ramp into the carpet bombing, or B, prevent Noan from doing some pretty crazy blitzkrieg stuff. So Berto,
Okay.
let me ask you, why is Noan not playing that 3rd copy of 554th?
Because he's making me eat my words. He
He's playing
is
around supply shortage?
he's playing around supply shortage. It's really important that you don't get 3 units eaten by supply shortage on turn 2, which is an
Yeah,
insane
yeah.
thing to say, that's like even something you can consider. But now that he sees Spoker didn't play it, he says, you don't have it.
So if you're Spoker, it'd be so nice to be able to ramp, but you do just lose to Blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg would be 17 in that case. So, yep,
Yeah,
this is the
and
only safe play, and Spoker's absolutely correct here.
the ramp doesn't actually do anything for you yet. Like, because he had nothing to play with 5 credits, even. Now, it's
Spoker
very
going
relevant
down
here
to
because you have
1.
6 credits, but
Yeah, and
I
no one
mean,
doesn't
Noan's
have it.
just gonna play the 20 Panzergren, and then Carpet comes out, and then 35T finishes it.
Yeah,
Oh, now we're
this changes things.
talking again.
So as far as healing goes, uh, Spoker has
Oh, no one can
Sincerely
kill
Yours and 2
this.
copies of Honey.
No one can kill the Gren guards with 0 credits and 0 damage left over, I believe. Yes.
Well, yeah, no, and then play the 35T on top of it. I think this is game for Noan, right? Oh,
No.
wait, sorry, no. I was thinking it was a 5-7. You're absolutely right. It is a 5-9. So you can spend everything that you have to get rid of it.
I imagine, yeah, you just play the 5-year plan. Set up for something a little better.
Now the question is, do you trade out to play around supply shortage, or... Yeah, I mean, you have so many resources, you might as well not get blown out, right? Might as well start making progress.
But crucially, there is no push found from Noan.
Yeah, is Noan also playing push?
Yeah, he's running. Wait. Let me check again just to make sure.
Yeah, I
But-
don't think Noan is playing push. You're thinking of the hyper aggro list, the
yes, my bad.
Japan Soviet hyper aggro list.
So okay, so no one actually has no burn grew guards at all. He has some good ways to deal with guards. He has the hammer. But
Yeah, the hammer would be fantastic here. That would seal the game. But unfortunately, it is nowhere to be found. You can deal 5 damage here by playing an infantry, the yak, the 35T, and the combined arms. But is that the best way to do it? Is there anything better?
wait, is there not? Oh yeah, it's one off lethal, isn't it? Because yeah, it's one off. I think it's one off lethal in a couple of ways.
Yep, 1 credit off lethal, I think. Yeah, I mean, oh, that is huge. I definitely misspoke earlier. Completely forgot about the Glamour Boys. I was looking exclusively for healing orders. But yeah, that Glamour Boys is pretty big here.
And he goes for the draw, which ends up not being particularly credit efficient. He does get to push up Pioneers, which
Yeah,
is
that's
pretty...
not bad. I mean, eating 4 damage, even if getting nothing in return, it essentially just says 4 costs, stop your order reduction, and gain 4 HQ defense, more or less.
Yeah, it makes it a lot harder for Spoker to play this carpet bombing, because he can't carpet bombing and Gren Guards, or carpet bombing
Or
and...
P47D, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the carpet bombing with the P47D or the Gren Guards would prevent lethal, but the carpet bombing as is, I mean, Spoker doesn't know it, but Noan happened to get that hammer. And if Spoker just plays the carpet bombing and
Well, he
doesn't
gets to
play
hold up
Ultra, yeah, I
Ultra.
mean, you get to hold up Ultra. If no one can draw maybe a oh, like, yep, and gets to trade out. Yeah, no, this is quite good. This is quite good.
If he finds a sickle, I mean, he would have to hammer first if he wants to get the draw out of the sickle, which, you know, he's probably not doing.
Interesting. Yeah, I like this better, actually.
It chooses to play around it. Avery slows down your opponent a lot, but it gets them another Panzer H deployment.
It might be worth. It's hard to say. I mean, what's your follow-up from it? The answer is not another guard unit, so it is a bit risky.
The other option is just deploy a Gren Guards, but your opponent has a minimum of 2 units to use with Blitzkrieg in that scenario. I do not like moving up Glamour Boys, because it gives the infantry something to do.
Yep,
and
I agree.
You don't get to play the War Machine. And the Panzer Grenadier is a big find. No one...
This is tough. This is very, very tough. You could like hammer the Churchill baiting, and then if you get it through, you sickle the Churchill, and if you don't, you sickle the Grengard, or sorry, the the Glamour Boys. But then like, what would you
But
do after that? Not
yeah,
anything particularly good.
then you don't really have enough credits to prevent Churchill from
From moving
taking the
up.
front line,
Yep.
and then you don't have Hammer left. So how are you dealing with the Churchill almost ever?
Yeah, this is unbelievably difficult. I don't think it's over at all. I mean, Spoker's sitting at a really not comfortable life total.
I think with
But
Churchill taking the front line, that's there is Hammer, of course, but it is just looking like a huge issue right now. And if you
yeah, the
trade with
second
the
Grengards kind of
Churchill,
seals the deal.
trading with the Churchill is interesting. And he's opting to keep holding up Ultra. And at this point, it's 4 turns in a row that you've held up 3 or 4 credits, so no one knows what's going to happen when he
Yep.
tries to play Red Dawn. Now, Spoker, he could have traded with the Glamour Boys and still pushed up the Avery, and then had enough credits to play Sexton. And the Grengards, if I did my math last turn right. But I mean, oh really? Okay. Yeah, this is
And
a strong play.
Spoker's continuing to kind of strangle Noan a bit, just kind of preventing Noan from doing anything as a legitimate way to win. And eventually is going to get this Mustang online and just start smacking for 6 every turn. So we'll see.
And without any fighters or bombers with Blitz, Spoker's just able to move all of his things into the front line with no worries.
Yeah, no one is gonna have.
Oh no. No one made a big misplay. Going for the 1-2 that summons the light infantry when it dies before the 556 means that Spoker gets another turn with this Grengards. However, probably not very important in the grand scheme of things. No one's deck is not a deck that is even designed to be able to come back.
Yeah, this is a slow death for no one here. Pretty crazy. I mean, Spoker got down to 1. So
Yeah, very close.
You know, very close game. But ramp is really solid, even when you don't have an early supply shortage. I mean, ramp is in such a strong place right now. I don't know about you, but I think ramp is in a very, very strong place for the time being.
Yeah, and we saw the rotation recently, right? And we see
Yep.
that Commonwealth is getting removed. But what I find interesting is that, you know, even with Commonwealth, one of our players just chose not to play it
True.
in their
Yeah, I mean,
main ramp list. So,
yeah,
you know, it's not...
ramp is definitely very, very much playable without Commonwealth. It's oftentimes better without Commonwealth. Ramp is eating the hit of, supply shortage, monsoon rot, and an hour of need, which Spoker is playing. I mean, you can play War Bonds and get the extra draw at the beginning of your next turn, but Yeah, I mean, an Hour of Need allows you to get there quicker, faster. So I mean, that is definitely a noteworthy hit out of ramp. So yeah, we'll definitely, it'll be interesting to see how ramp evolves post covert operations. And Noan has a highly aggressive hand. Spoker has a highly anti-aggro hand with that supply priorities. So we'll see what happens there. But Spoker might end up winning an OCC without dropping a single game, which would be quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I have a hard time imagining no one's going to do 15th Cavalry and then double 15th Cavalry.
Yeah, I mean, I think that just plays way too into the supply priorities and the
Supply shortage.
supply shortages. Yeah. Yeah, so we'll see. Spoker has a decision to make. To greed or not to greed? That is the question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real thing to consider, right? Because you're so worried about 35T.
Yeah.
And if no one plays 35T and then you're playing Convoy next turn, you're just taking so much damage for free.
Yeah, and I mean, this gives no one an opportunity to play that naval supply run. And I have to think that we're going to see it here. It means that, I mean, what does Spoker have on turn 4 that's going to deal with it in one turn? And the answer is I don't think there's anything other than supply priorities into another supply shortage, which I feel like Spoker would have played already, right? So,
I'm looking at Spoker's list. He doesn't actually have supply shortage. He only has the
oh,
2 copies of supply priorities.
oh, that changes things.
Yeah. I
Yeah, I
think
mean, in that case, then no one is absolutely free to go do whatever the heck he wants. I mean, seems like it's
so.
almost guaranteed that you're gonna get a huge naval supply run here.
Yeah, and that makes the decision to play supply priorities as a 1-for-1 there a little more dubious.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
especially when 2 of the other cards in your hand are carpet bombing and high altitude bombing. You're probably not gonna have a whole lot of board clears online for a really long time. I think even just waiting in 1 or 2 extra turns, and then if it's still a 1-for-1, you can still go for it.
yeah, it's
Um,
just I'm sure the thought process was if he plays 35T and then I'm playing Convoy next turn, that's at least 4 damage that I'm taking like for free that I could have prevented, maybe 6.
and if you're Noan, you have to be so happy to see um the sudden strike as your card discarded for turn. I mean, that's literally almost entirely useless in this matchup. I mean, Spoker does have some honeys, I believe, in the Britain ramp list, but I don't believe that he's including them in this list. So Noan starting to attempt a comeback here.
Yeah, he
And
says he won't go down quite that easily. He's got
Spoker's
fight left in him.
flawless record is officially broken. Um, but Noan still has to win with both the hyper aggro list as well as this Japan list. And that is, it's going to be challenging, especially the Japan list, because Japan Finland is exceedingly good at countering aggressive lists. The fact that you get to out of the mist something into scrap metal and have a huge credit lead right off the bat makes it very, very difficult to come back from as aggro. It means that you have to either not play your cards or accept that your opponent's going to have like 5 credits on turn 2. However, the worst matchup, at least in my opinion, for Jalvage is Brit ramp, and although Spoker only has access to the US ramp, it's probably similar enough that it's not a matchup that I would want if I were Noan.
Oh, is no one going to do it all?
And once again, Spoker does not have a solid answer for it. Yeah, I mean, Spoker doesn't have early ramp or removal or a... Oh, never mind. That's a huge top deck. Absolutely massive. I mean, no
And
one
that,
didn't have Blitzkrieg, but still very, very relevant.
number 4, so that you can still get this other 35T out. That's actually really big. Oh, that's the Noan line I know and love, to be honest. The
Did you do that on
10...
purpose? The line,
Sorry, what did I
the
do?
Noan line that you Noan love.
Oh, I did not do that on purpose. To send out all 3 of the little guys, because you know your opponent doesn't have it, and then your opponent top decks it, and then you grab
Yeah.
your 4th one.
Yeah, I'll be very curious to see what Noan hits off of this Bloody Sickle right here. I feel like it makes the most sense
Wait.
to go for draw, but maybe not.
Wait, Smoker's just dead, isn't he? I think he's just dead. Bloody Sickle plus...
Yeah.
he's dead.
Yep, yep. The exact lethal. And I believe that no one has to use 4 of those 5 credits, 2 of them to move up, 2 of them for the 2 orders, and then attack with the SU and the 554th, and that will be lethal.
Oh
That
my
works too.
goodness. Well,
All right,
might...
and we're very, I mean, no one very quickly managed to claw it back from the brink of defeat, and now we are here. The final match between Noan's Jalvage list and Spoker's US Brit ramp list. I have to say, I think that Spoker is favored, but yeah, I mean, best of luck to both players. I hope that Noan at least gets to start with something relatively aggressive, maybe something like a Type 94 TK early, or some other aggressive start. And we see Spoker is going first with supply priorities and War Machine and Convoy, and then Grengards too. I mean, that is a very, very solid hand for Spoker.
Yeah, but Noan, at the same time, he has these 34ths, which help him play around supply priorities, while
Yeah,
still
you know,
applying good pressure.
I've talked to players in the Chinese community about this inclusion of 34th in a lot of no one's decks. In fact, I think I've had a conversation with Spoker about 34th, and Spoker simply said, yeah, 34th is hard to kill. And that's why no one plays it. And
Hitting the
hitting the
Sally!
Sally! Oh my
Oh,
gosh! What a turn of events!
looking at 5th Rangers, I suppose he's feeling pretty burned by these supply priorities not quite doing enough. Thinking about just trading at Rangers in.
Yeah, it's really tough. I mean, you have several options, and every single one of them is suboptimal. Like, I don't know. It's a really tough decision to make if you're Spoker.
And no
Well,
one
I
just
mean, no one
drawing a
has
million cards.
literally all of the draw that you could possibly want in the entire game. And
That's signal gone.
suddenly,
Signal gone is relevant.
Signal Gone is absolutely relevant. There's definitely less burst damage than in typical Jagro lists. But if we see type 93 into Shinano, how much is that gonna do? That's gonna do 6 plus 4. That'll be 10. No longer necessarily guaranteed to hit face, as Spoker does play that Le Terrible.
You're
And
telling
we're
me
gonna
you
see
don't
the
even
Audacity
pronounce the
instead. I
L?
mean, I like this Audacity play quite a bit, as it sets up a Shinano to be more likely to hit face, but Spoker does have this key turn with the carpet bombing.
So I
And it looks like no one's gonna start off by discarding Sally, drawing 2. Getting to draw some extra with this Type 94 TK into the expansion. Potentially drawing enough units to hit that critical mass that you need for the Shinano, and Spoker doesn't have the...
Oh my
Oh,
god.
and the Sally again! Oh my gosh.
I mean, I don't think it matters because he overdraws now, right? So
No, I
it's
mean,
actually
it
bad to
draws
hit,
1
but
extra card.
yeah, I guess it's still good, but
Kinda would've liked
there
to
is
see
the fourth
expansion, though.
expansion. I mean, I don't know how many cards he even has left in his deck.
Do you just play like a Kate into Shinano, or
Um,
going for
but
the
that
Shinano prior to Kate? Oh, I see, because you could potentially set up a Out of the Mist into Scrap Metal on the Terrible, but that does not look like it's gonna happen.
yeah, I mean, he can do it on the Grand Guards now, which is fine.
Oh, true, you
Um,
can do it on Grengards. Scrap Metal the Grengards. Play in Infantry Regiment 61 or whatever that's called. But that's a little bit slow. I would like to see something a bit more aggressive. And no one's really running out of cards in deck. I don't know how many there are left, but it has to be like less than 10 here, right?
yeah, and he's he just manages to get out that unit, but I think that no one played Winter Regiment because he realized he didn't have the time to get down the cavalry and the key. Because you'd think he would play that if he could, right? I don't.
Yeah, I don't love this. I think that 5th Rangers is better, just getting another body on the field, but...
Yeah, like you can just play a 4/4 5th Rangers, right? And then you protect your Le Terrible. You still have another 5th Rangers for the 8/8. If you need the draw the following turn, now you're...
It's kind of tough. Oh, that Grengards more or less seals the deal. That's a huge top deck.
That's very big, but no one's still gonna get to value trade with this Winter Regiment on the Glamour Boys. That's pretty big.
Yeah, I mean, maybe no one has some sort of chances with Shiden,
No one
but
could also hit Signal Regiment off of the Nate, which would be kind of brutal.
yeah, I mean, Spoker is really running out of cards. You do get the Terrible into 8/8 5th Rangers, but that pretty much uses all your credits. So, oh, nice Out of the Mist.
Yeah, that makes a big difference here.
And I think no one has 1 or 2 cards in deck. I believe no more than 2. So, no one kind of has to use the resources on board to secure this one.
Oh my
And
goodness, that
having that one
victory
extra
march is
credit,
insane.
yeah, having that one extra credit for
Oh my
Victory
God.
March is huge.
Oh,
That
that's
is
absolutely the
basically
nuts.
the last thing that you want to see if you're Noan. And there's the last card in deck. It is a scrap metal, and that isn't going to be particularly useful. Spoker is all the way up to 17 now. And really all that they have left is a 5/6 and a 4/4 Glamour Boys and oh, I guess you have Dragon Slayer still, but the Dragon Slayer and a Dream doesn't seem like the most optimal play. I'm very surprised to see that
Well,
not trade into. Wait, is that Signal?
oh, it is
Oh, that's
Signal. That's
Signal.
funny.
I was under the impression that that was no longer around. So yeah, I mean that can get you an extra 4 damage here.
What the signal is from Nate.
High altitude bombing. Oh man. Oh yeah, that's right. The signal is from Nate. Yep. You're 100% right. And we're gonna see what this hits. All right, it hits the 2 least important targets. I'm not sure if the Dragon Slayer is enough.
No, there's no way that it gets there because there's no way to
Yeah,
prevent this B-24 from just
trading
trading
in.
in. Yeah, and then there's
So Spoker narrowly coming out in a 3-2 victory, went 6 games in a row undefeated, uh, lost 2, and then came back in the absolute final match. So
and
yeah, what a
in
finals.
and in his hour of need, he gets there with the ramp.
That was a heck of a matchup because you watch Spoker go through the first 2 games and go, oh, okay, I know the direction this is going. Maybe they can go undefeated. And then no one comes back winning those 2 games in less than like half the time it took to play one of the previous ones.
Yeah.
Like it just is like, oh, okay, we're going to game 5. Cool. Cool. But it makes me wonder, and I don't want to focus too much on Noan because I think Spoker played amazing and I want to highlight him. But on Noan's side, is it just a question of, and we've kind of, I feel like we saw this in Noan's previous matchup as well, just kind of playing the first game and like, oh, I'm in a bad spot now. Hold on a second. Let me hunker down and just do this right. And, it makes me wonder for game 3 and game 4, no one just showed up and was like, yeah, I got this, no problem. Do you think it was a gameplay thing or do you think it was just a matchup thing? Starry, I'll ask you this question because it felt like Spoker was kind of struggling with the US mid-range, the US ramp deck a little bit. But was it just a question of matchup? Like no one rolled, the nuts essentially with the opening hand, just went underneath and kind of won the game?
I mean, I would almost argue that all 3 of the games, Noan had pretty solid starts, and Spoker. I mean, there was the one game with the supply priorities, but Spoker I don't think played it 100% optimally. Um, so I do think that overall, no one kind of, because Spoker did not play that quite optimally, I think that no one had a pretty good shot at high rolling Spoker all 3 times. A lot of the hands that Spoker had didn't have a whole lot of ramp, if any at all. Didn't have a whole lot of um, anti-aggro tools up until maybe like turn 6, 7, 8. But it just goes to show, I mean, the guards alone in ramp are so strong. I've said that Glamour Boys is really strong for a long time now, and yeah, it's Glamour Boys is a card. What do you think, Berto?
Um, yeah, Grenadier Guards also pulled a lot of weight in that in those matches as well. The 2 things that I'm still thinking about in my mind is, I mean, Spoker must have done a lot of testing to get to the point where he says, I'm not running any supply shortages in this list because I think I'm good enough against aggro with this deck already. Which we saw how good it can be against aggro, but we also saw the limitations as well, right? The other thing is that by that 3rd game, you've got to be thinking, where is my goddamn Jasko against this guy when he's hitting you with like 3 units every turn for 4 turns in a row? And yeah, I kept thinking, are we ever going to see this Jasko? And we never did.
The
And
elusive Jasko.
which is funny because if it was a Skytrain, we would have had 3 of them. So it
Yeah.
is
Oh
what it
my god,
is.
you're 100% right on that. Yep.
Uh-huh. But sometimes we see the final result of a series and go, oh, it was 2-0, but it was a lot closer than it seemed, or it was 3-0, was closer than it seemed. This was 3-2, and I think it's even closer than that 3-2 defined it as, right? Because we had game 2, Spoker was down to like 5-ish health, and then started drawing the guards, the grenadiers, the glamour boys. I mean, game 5, if it wasn't for Noan essentially running out of cards because the 34th just hung around and like ate up half his deck, like that would have been even closer. So I just want to give Spoker a huge shout out, obviously for winning, but for defeating Noan 5 in a heck of a hard fought series is something to definitely celebrate. So huge shout out to Spoker for not only winning the May OCC, but also taking out Noan 5, which is no easy task. In a heck of a matchup. Let's go ahead and bring up the final bracket here so we can break down exactly what the state was all about. And there you have Spoker winning our May OCC 3-2, defeating Noan 5. Spoker having not lost a match up until that point, defeating Electrify and Head. Bottom of that bracket, you see Noan defeating Nuff 2-1, Morphling 2-1, and then just couldn't squeak it out in the finals, taking home $450 for their troubles. So phenomenal job to both players, to all the players. As always, just a spectacular cast. Berto, Starry, and of course Thanatron, who completed most of our day with us here. So phenomenal job, and thank you all for tuning in. We will see you next month for the June OCC.
3, 2, 1.